Chapter 1076. Yi Hongyu was the great divine priest of judgment. She helped Mo Shanshan to live in seclusion in the depths of Peach Mountain while Mo Shanshan spent these days studying how to break the array in the precipice. In this process, both of them gained a lot. Mo Shanshan's mastery of the Great Blockage Formation was getting more and more terrifying. Yi Hongyu, on the other hand, had learned new Taoism skills by observing the Great Blockage Formation. Tonight in the Divine Hall of Judgment, when facing the hierarch Xiong Chumo's Tianqi, she restrained her breath and turned it into a stone. There was not enough time. Mo Shanshan could not break the great array of clear light in the front yard of Peach Mountain. Yi Hongyu could only choose the back of Peach Mountain as the last escape route. Apart from that, they had prepared many plans for tonight. However, the Abbey Dean's decisiveness was so calm that those better plans were all useless. Mo Shanshan opened this route more than 10 days ago. Last night, she received the news of the Divine Hall of Judgment. She and Yi Hongyu's subordinates started to set up, waited, and succeeded. There was a saying in the cultivation world that there were 3 addicts. They were the Tao addict, the calligraphy addict, and the flower addict. They were the most talented and beautiful female cultivators. Now, the flower addict, Lu Qinjia, was cultivating in the Yueluan kingdom and no longer cared about worldly affairs. Yi Hongyu became the great divine priest of judgment and Mo Shanshan became the queen of the great river kingdom. No one would have thought that these 2 women, who did not have much contact with each other in their cultivation life, would work together without the world knowing. What's more, they had such a tacit understanding. Yi Hongyu sent the letter, which was equivalent to handing over her life to the other party. She was a cruel judge. She did not even trust the academy, but was willing to trust Mo Shanshan. As the queen, Mo Shanshan did not hesitate to leave her country after receiving the letter and went to the divine halls of West Hill at great risk. Where did their trust come from? In the future, when this legendary story was spread around the world by the new stream, people would often ponder over it, but they could not find an answer. Perhaps only Ning Ke knew the answer to this question. Because for many years, he was in the basket under the iron chain, and he was also in front of the White Bone Mountain at the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine. He had seen them fight to the death, and he had seen them go through thick and thin together. He had seen them accompany each other in their youth, and he had seen them, chatting like ordinary girls. The fog at the bottom of the abyss was very thick. Although they had all taken the antidote pills specially prepared by the judicial department, they still felt a little dizzy, especially the seemingly handsome horses, which were even more exhausted. Therefore, the carriages moved very slowly. What comforted them was that the people sent by the Divine Hall to confirm the situation would also arrive very slowly. After walking for a long time, a ray of light finally penetrated the fog and fell into the dark forest. But it was unknown whether it was the early morning or the scorching sun in the sky. Mo Shanshan, a divine talisman master with a high state, and the black-robed deacons of the Divine Hall of Judgment who were best at escaping and killing, were in the team. After Sang Sang and Ning Ke, the abyss finally welcomed the second group of conquerors. The wheels rolled over the rotten leaves. The ground was too soft and undulating from time to time. Sitting in the carriage was like sitting on a boat. Some people would feel comfortable, while others would feel a little dizzy. Mo Shanshan heaved a sigh of relief when Yi Hongyu woke up. She brought the water to her lips and fed it to her. She asked softly, "How do you feel? Do you want to eat something?" "A little dizzy," Yi Hongyu said with a frown. She might be hungry, or she might have lost too much blood, or she might be seasick. But she didn't think it was because apart from dizziness, she also felt a little uncomfortable in her chest and abdomen. The discomfort came from her Taoist heart and her real heart. Her Taoist heart suddenly became a little unstable. Her heart suddenly beat faster and the blood in her veins rose and fell like a tide. Something would definitely happen if she had a sudden impulse. She lifted the curtain of the carriage and looked into the distance. The forest was full of fog. The sunlight became very soft and fell on her snow-white face. She looked very beautiful. However, the soft sunlight was destined to blur the scenery in the distance. Even if she opened her eyes without blinking and wanted to see further, she couldn't do it. She still looked in that direction quietly. She knew that it was the northeast. She didn't know why, but she knew it was because the Song Kingdom was in the northeast. Yi Su was in the northeast. The sunlight became softer and softer. It was as if it was no longer moving in a straight line but became something like water. The scene became rippling. Yi Hongyu looked at the distorted scene in the soft sunlight and carefully analyzed it. She seemed to see the Jishou Abbey, the mountain path, the thin lad with a wooden sword on his back, the blue sea and his cold face. Finally, she saw the verdant canyon and finally saw his smile. His figure gradually faded away. He was no longer as straight as before, but he became taller and taller. His figure finally disappeared in the sunlight and could no longer be found. At this moment, Yi Hongyu knew that her brother had left this world. She closed her eyes. She didn't fall asleep. She just didn't want to look. Blood flowed from the corner of her mouth again. It was not because of internal injuries, but because of heartbreak. Her face became abnormally white because the soft sunlight had suddenly become cold. After a while, she opened her eyes again. They were calm and extremely bright. There were no stars in the deepest part of them. There was only the brightest star hanging in the silent night sky. The blue sea was fake. It was the satin on Mo Shanshan's waist. Unfortunately, the feeling was real. He had really left. The star in the deepest part of her eyes suddenly twinkled. Two extremely thin streams of blood flowed from the corner of her eyes. She was expressionless. There was no sorrow on her face. She did not cry. She was only bleeding. However, Mo Shanshan could see the infinite sorrow on her face and the vast ocean in her eyes. Her heart ached and she reached out to hold her hand. She didn't say anything and just held her hand tightly. They walked out of the abyss and crossed the Green Mountains. They had long been prepared. With the secret cooperation of the Judicial Department, the carriages were not stopped. Even the West Hill Divine Palace did not know of their existence. They walked out of the West Hill Divine Kingdom and came to the surging river. In front of the famous iron chain, Yi Hongyu looked at it for a while. Then the carriages continued south and entered the Great River Kingdom. At this time, the news of Yi Su's death had spread all over the world. As the most loyal ally of the Tang Empire, the Great River Kingdom was also in full preparation for war. The absence of the monarch did not affect the judgment of the courtiers. The people on the street all had swords hanging on their waists. They walked among the frost maples with solemn expressions. It really felt like every citizen was a soldier. Along the way, Yi Hongyu constantly issued orders to the priests and deacons who were still loyal to her in the Divine Hall of Judgment to hide. Peach Mountain would inevitably face a bloody purge. She did not know how many of them would survive, but she had to try her best. On the stone steps in front of the palace, Missouri Shanshan said goodbye to Yi Hongyu. Yi Hongyu would go to the Mogan Mountain Black Ink Garden to recover. At the same time, that place would become the office of the old Divine Hall of Judgment. Although she was still worried about Yi Hongyu's injury, she was the monarch after all. She had a lot of government affairs to deal with. Especially in such a serious situation, she had too much responsibility on her shoulders. She could not stay far away from the power center of the Great River Kingdom. I really want to know what you were thinking when you looked at the river in front of the iron chain. Lu Bai looked at the river and comprehended the sword. He drew the sword on a piece of paper and sent it to me. I want to see how much difference there is between my sword and the river. The difference Yi Hongyu was talking about was not the difference in the state of sword Taoism, but something else. What Lu Bai and my brother did is something I have never done before. I have always been indifferent to the faith. Maybe it is also a kind of piety. Or maybe I need to change something. Mo Shanshan said, the whole world will change. Yi Hongyu knew that she was talking about the new stream. She said, I will pick up the sword and protect his faith. From the moment she said that, the new stream had a new guardian. When Yi Su founded the new stream, the first guardian was the Sage of Sword, Lu Bai, and then Lu Yiqing. The sword Garrett played the most important role. The academy and the new stream were inextricably linked. But neither eldest brother nor Ning Ke could play the role of guardian, because they were non-believers. Yi Hongyu turned to Mo Shanshan and continued, I need more help from you. Mo Shanshan understood what she meant. If the new stream had the support of a secular country, it would definitely develop faster and its foundation would be more stable. Just like how the academy could not play the role of guardian, the Tang Empire could give the new stream the most direct military support, but they could not let the new stream occupy the spiritual ruling position in the country. The Great River Kingdom did not have this problem. Although the people living here were close to the Tang, they were still believers of Haotian. There was no such thing as the South School of Haotian Taoism. Most importantly, she was the monarch. That's something I naturally have to do. Mo Shanshan pushed up her glasses and looked very cute. Yi Hongyu noticed her cute action and frowned. Ning Ke made it. Mo Shanshan was a little embarrassed and explained, it's for my eyes. It's very useful. As long as you don't mistake it as a token of love. Yi Hongyu mocked, you went to Peach Mountain to help me because you wanted to help Ning Quebec. Does he know about this? Even if he does, will he care? Mo Shanshan looked at the flower tree in the corner of the imperial city and said, that tree blooms by itself. It doesn't need anyone to look at it. Yi Hongyu sighed, what an idiotic way of saying that. Mo Shanshan smiled and said, he likes to call people idiots. He used to call you an idiot in front of me. Can you not relate everything to that shameless and useless guy? Yi Hongyu said angrily, most women in the world don't know how to love themselves. There are very few that I respect. You are one of them. But if you can't get rid of that weakness, you can only be an ordinary woman. Mo Shanshan asked curiously, what weakness? Love, or Ning Quebec, Yi Hongyu said, if you have desires, just find a man to sleep with. Other so-called feelings are all fake. It's so stupid to indulge in those feelings. It's infuriating. Mo Shanshan said helplessly, it's not the same thing. Even if what you said makes sense, even if love is like honey and you can have a taste, you shouldn't find that useless Ning Quebec. There are few people as shameless as him, and I've never seen someone as useless as him. Yi Hongyu made the most negative comment on Ning Ke expressionlessly. In the past, she actually admired Ning Quebec. Even though he was indeed shameless, at least in some aspects, what he showed was in line with her aesthetics or philosophy. She even thought that he was the same kind of person as herself. But now, her view had changed a lot. She failed to stop the fire in the courtyard in the capital of the Kingdom of Song because she was actually trapped in the West Hill Divine Palace. And also because she thought that the academy could protect Yi Su well. But Ning Ke failed. In her view, his incompetence on this matter was infuriating. I'm leaving. Take care of yourself. Will you always stay in the palace? I am the monarch. Have you ever thought that if you go to Chang'an, you might play a bigger role? But I am the monarch. Even though I was forced to become the monarch, I have to be responsible for the people of the Great River. The war has begun. How can I leave? Yi Hongyu said nothing more. She called Chu Yuxian and Qinqi over and handed them a letter. She said, only Ning Ke can read it. When they left Chang'an, Chu Yuxian and Qinqi were determined to die. It was with this attitude that they performed well in the West Hill Divine Palace. The beginning of the chaos was their two conversations. They gradually left the West Hill and arrived at the Great River Kingdom. Only then did they really believe that they did not need to die. They relaxed a lot, but now they were nervous again, just like when they left Chang'an. Chu Yuxian felt that the letter in his hand was as heavy as a stone. He did not know what was written in the letter, but from Yi Hongyu's expression, he knew that the content was very important. He and Qinchi would not stay in the Great River Kingdom. They would continue to move forward and enter the Yueluan Kingdom through the forest at the bend of the river. Finally, they would return to the Tang. It was a long journey, and they felt a little overwhelmed with such a letter. The carriage to the Tang Empire drove away with the letter. Yi Hongyu was about to get on the carriage when she heard a conversation at the gate of the palace behind them. It was Cat Girl who was talking to Mo Shanshan. Since Hao Tian is not in the human world, why don't we go to Chang'an? Mo Shanshan did not answer. Yi Hongyu did not know whether it was because she did not have an answer or because of other reasons. Yi Hongyu looked back at Cat Girl and smiled sarcastically. She did not say anything. She stepped into the carriage and ordered her subordinates to drive away. They went out of the capital and arrived at Mogan Mountain at dusk. The horse carriage traveled on the quiet mountain road. The sunset painted the western sky red. Yi Hongyu lifted the curtain of the carriage and looked at the bloody twilight. She wondered where the divine kingdom was. Were you really there? There is nothing to say. Jiang Yi is in his last month. I will focus on doing a good job. Please encourage me. One last thing that I haven't said for half a year, please vote for Jiang Yi. Thank you. Chapter 1077. Chen Pipi and the others returned to Chang'an. Ning Ke met them at the city gate, but eldest brother was nowhere to be found. Don't worry, senior brother has to leave. Chen Pipi looked at him and said, you don't need to feel too burdened about this matter. My father's actions are like the will of the natural stream. No one knows where it will fall. It's not your fault. When they reunited again, there was no anger or disappointment, but only comfort. Ning Ke knew that Chen Pipi was such a person, so he was not surprised. However, he felt that his mood became heavier, especially when fourth brother looked at him and sighed. Ning Ke bowed to them and the disciples of the sword Garrett. Then he said to Chen Pipi, it's my fault after all. Chen Pipi said, Headmaster once said that those who seek benevolence will get benevolence without complaint. That must be how senior brother felt when he left. Those who live and those who leave have their own gains. In this case, there's nothing wrong with it. Fourth brother also said, if you really think you're wrong, don't make mistakes in the future. Ning Ke turned to look at the numerous caravans on the official road outside the city gate and said, I won't give myself a chance to make mistakes again. People who had been away from home for years returned home, and many left for the frontier. As time passed, the situation on the continent became more and more tense. The Tang Empire faced the most difficult situation and began the most thorough and powerful mobilization. The resources and spirit accumulated for thousands of years were fully displayed at this moment. Whether it was the teachers in the countryside or the girls in the brothels, no one was afraid of the coming war. They only quietly looked forward to it. Countless supplies and fodder were transported from the regular warehouses of various states and counties. Countless cavalrymen left from various military camps and rode to various passes at the border. The Northeast Border Military, which had been newly established for several years, had not recovered to the peak of its strength when Lord Xiahou was leading the army. They also began to prepare to destroy the Yan Kingdom. In Tuyang City, there was a hubbub of voices and the neighing of war horses. In the general's mansion, countless battle plans were gradually formed. They were all plans to slaughter Qingjing. The Yulin Royal Guards went south from Chang'an and arrived at the plain behind the Verdant Canyon. They joined the Southern Expedition Army which had been guarding the Verdant Canyon for years and were ready to attack the hundreds of thousands of South Jin troops and the papal cavalrymen of the Divine Halls of West Hill in the south. The most critical and dangerous battlefield was still in the northwest of the empire. The Golden Tribe Royal Court was marching south. A war that would destroy the empire was inevitable. Countless military orders were sent from the North military camp to the border. The 200,000 most elite soldiers of the Northern Battlefront Army had gathered. They were ready to fight against the barbarians on the grassland with their blood and lives. However, after losing the Xiangwan Plain for several years, the Tang army was seriously short of warhorses. The well-trained old cavalrymen could only fight in the infantry. In the coldest days of winter, Chu Yuxian and Qinshi finally returned to Chang'an. They went south from the West Hill to the Great River, passed through the dense forest, and sneaked around the Yueluan kingdom to return to the Tang territory. They suffered a lot, but fortunately, they did not lose the letter. Ning Ke took the sweaty letter and knew that Chu Yuxian had kept the letter close to his body for dozens of days. He raised his eyebrows and wondered what Yi Hongyu wrote in the letter. Why did she take it so seriously? Didn't she know that a verbal letter was relatively safer? Unless what Yi Hongyu wanted to say to him could not be known by others, not even Chu Yuxian and Qinshi, whom he trusted very much. He crushed the fire seal and tore open the envelope. He took out the thin piece of paper and looked at it. He saw the words she had written. There were very few words on the paper, so he didn't need to look at them for too long. However, those words were very important, so he looked at them for a very long time. Impossible. This was Ning Ke's first reaction after reading Yi Hongyu's inference. After that spring breeze and rain, he never felt her existence again. He looked at the giant ship sailing towards the Divine Kingdom in the sunset. He thought she must have returned to the Divine Kingdom. For him, she was already dead. What if what Yi Hongyu said was right? He might find the answer to many things, such as the Abbey Dean's choice. But he still could not find the deepest and truest reason for his choice. Of course, these things were not important to Ning Quebec. All his attention was swallowed by the literal meaning of the letter. She did not return to the Divine Kingdom, but was still in the human world. Ning Ke knew that it was time for him to leave Chang'an. He kept silent for a long time. He entered the palace and talked with Li Yu for a long night. He told her many things and wrote a letter to Mo Shanshan, but he tore it up in the end. Then he went up to the gate tower. He enjoyed the scenery on the gate tower. When Sang Sang came to the human world, he watched her for a long time in the divine halls of West Hill. Then she left the human world. He thought she had returned to the Divine Kingdom, so he watched her for a long time. He looked at the countless experts, looked at the clouds moving, looked at the great rivers and mountains of the human world, looked at this city in this country, but in reality, he was also searching. He wanted to use his own eyes to find the traces left behind by her. It was early in the morning. He cooked a pot of vegetable porridge by the hut on the city wall and drank it while it was still hot. The falling snowflakes melted when they touched his face. Then he walked to the side of the city wall, faced the human world, and put an arrow on his bow. With the help of the god-stunning array in Chang'an, his primordial 13 arrows could do many incredible things. But they were also limited. Many conditions were needed for them to be effective. For example, in the autumn in front of the imperial palace in Lingang, he tried to kill the drunkard with the eldest brother. But once the drunkard found out, it would not work. Because of these and other reasons, his iron arrow did not appear in the human world for many years after the right to light on the Peach Mountain. Now he pointed his arrow at the human world. Who was he going to shoot? After Yisu's death, Long Qin left the capital of the Kingdom of Song. He led 2,000 papal cavalrymen of the divine halls to the north in the wind and snow. Then the eldest brother left to look for Chen Pipi and the others who had escaped first. Just like in the past years, the drunkard also left with him. To put it nicely, he was like a fallen leaf following the autumn wind. To put it bluntly, he was like a gangrene attached to the bone. The eldest brother found Chen Pipi and the others and escorted them back to the Tang territory from the divine halls of West Hill. Then he did not follow them. He watched them enter Chang'an and left first. No one knew where he went. If the drunkard had entered the distanceless state at the same time, he might have been able to catch up with the eldest brother, just like before. But somehow, his reaction was a little slower. His feet were a little sluggish on the cold snow as if they were frozen. Then he lost track of the drunkard. Because the drunkard did not want to chase after them, he followed them all the way. He had a lot of time to think and he was getting closer to the truth. He guessed the reason why Li Man left. So his reaction was a little slower and his figure became more desolate. He turned around and walked to the east. His footsteps left clear footprints on the snow. There was hot air in those footprints. It was the flowing sweat. He sweated a lot because of fear and the truth. The eldest brother said in the capital of the kingdom of Song that he would regret it. Yes, he began to regret it. The small town was in the east of the Tang Empire. He walked very slowly on the snow and did not return to the small town until the next day. He did not go home but went to the only calligraphy and painting shop in the neighboring town and asked Cao Xiaoshu to make a pot of good tea. After all, tea was not as good as wine. The drunkard held the small porcelain cup with 2 fingers and looked at the yellow tea in the cup. He felt the slight astringency between his lips and teeth and thought that at least the astringent tea could be drunk, but the astringent wine could not be drunk. Cao Xiaoshu sat opposite the tea table with a calm expression. He picked up the teacups and sent them to the 4 corners of heaven and earth. He washed the tea with tea and boiled the tea with the sea. A pinch of old tea mixed with the steaming new water in the iron kettle created a wonderful tea flavor. The 2 did not speak but just drank the tea quietly. The drunkard liked this feeling very much. He felt that Cao Xiaoshu was qualified to drink tea with him. Unfortunately, he was just an ordinary person, otherwise he would have invited him to drink the wine in his pot. The 2 waiters who were said to be the boss's relatives were still in the shop. But as time went by, the 2 fierce teenagers in Chang'an had now become young men. They looked much calmer. Zhang San and Li Si were playing chess, black and white. They were very focused and did not notice the drunkard's gaze at all. They were frowning and thinking hard, just like those legendary masters in the dark, such as those in the Lank Temple or the pair in the back of the mountain of the academy. They had also played chess in front of the drunkard before. They were very nervous at that time. They were the only 3rd-generation disciples of the academy besides Tang Xiaotang. If everything went well, they would become the next generation of mountain monsters like Jun Mo or Yu Lian in many years. If the drunkard knew about this, they would die thoroughly. No matter how powerful their teacher was, he could not save them. The dead could not be brought back to life, not even Li Man and Jun Mo. In the drunkard's eyes, Zhang San and Li Si were terrible at chess. Of course, he did not mean that they were terrible, but he set his sights too high. People who had lived for tens of thousands of years were easily bored. Naturally, they would try all kinds of interesting things, such as games. The drunkard and the butcher had played those human games over and over again. Besides, as a grand cultivator, he was naturally very intelligent. One could imagine his level. Even if he did not add his talent to chess, no one could beat him on the chessboard except for a few people in the back of the mountain of the academy and the Lank Temple. If a high-level person watched a low-level person play chess, it would all be a bad move. After watching for a while, the drunkard felt bored. Coincidentally, the 5th brew of tea had been finished, and the remaining tea was tasteless. There was no need to make fresh tea. He felt much calmer. He stood up and teased Zhang San and Li Si, and told Cao Xiaoshu about the recent news of the county school. Then he walked out of the shop. He still did not go back to the house, nor did he go to the tavern. Instead, he went to the only butcher shop in the town. In fact, the tavern was also the only one. Therefore, many things in this town were the only ones. Perhaps this was what he and the butcher wanted. It was dark in the butcher shop, and there was a foul smell everywhere. It was the smell of blood, meat, organs, feces and urine mixed together. The drunkard frowned slightly and tried to calm down his sense of smell. Then he found a cleaner place and sat down. The butcher was removing the hair from the pig trotters. A dozen white and fat pig trotters were neatly stacked on the chopping board and were being burned by the fire in his hands. With a slight sizzling sound, a faint burnt smell gradually spread, and the surface of the pig trotters became slightly yellow. The drunkard looked at the scene and shook his head. He took down the flagon from his waist and began to drink. He knew very well why the butcher refused to give up this business or hobby, but he really had no interest in it. After removing the hair from the pig trotters, it was time to cut them open. The butcher picked up the greasy kitchen knife and was about to cut it, but his arms suddenly became stiff. Because he sensed the drunkard's strangeness, because the drunkard spoke too little today. The butcher turned around and looked at him. After a while, he asked, "What's wrong?" He and the drunkard had lived in this town for many years. Earlier, they had lived in another town. They knew each other very well, and it was hard not to know each other. For many years, they just hid and enjoyed the fun that they had enjoyed countless times and had become boring. It was not until these years that they returned to the human world. To be more precise, it was the drunkard who returned to the human world, because he was faster. The butcher was still the same as before, slaughtering pigs and sheep in the butcher shop, and eating pig trotters and sheep heads every day. But if there was something that the drunkard could not solve, he would naturally put the butcher's knife on his waist, walk out of the butcher shop, and start killing. He knew what the drunkard was doing recently, to keep an eye on the first disciple of the headmaster of academy, and then he went to the capital of the kingdom of Song. He also knew that Yi Su was already dead. When he sensed the divine light by the East Sea, he was also moved by the sacred meaning hidden in it. The drunkard did not directly answer his question, but continued to drink, like a whale swallowing the sea. He drank with the state of immeasurable, and did not put down the flagon for a long time. Until an hour later, when the last drop of wine dripped from the flagon, it was finally empty. Except for the time when Sang Sang drank it all, the flagon had never really been empty. But today, it was empty. The drunkard drank all the wine in the flagon. The butcher's expression became extremely serious. He had not seen the drunkard so nervous for many years. The last time was when Haotian came to the human world and came to the small town, and the second time was when the old yellow bull dragged a broken cart into the town. The drunkard put down the flagon and looked up at him. With this movement, all the wine that was poured into his stomach turned into sweat, and overflowed from the tens of thousands of pores on the surface of his body. In the sound of splashing, his body became the source of a waterfall. Countless streams of water gushed out and flowed everywhere, instantly washing all the bones, minced meat and blood on the butcher's shop floor. His body was like a wine bag which was now emptied. After the water washed the floor, it was blown away by the cold wind outside the butcher's shop. Countless streams of airflow blew around, making the signboard of the butcher's shop flutter. It was not peaceful. The butcher looked at his pale cheeks, and held the knife tighter in his hand. There is something, maybe there is something I did wrong. The drunkard looked at him and murmured, Li Man Man said I would regret it. Now that I think about it, I do regret it. I don't know if it can be redeemed. The butcher slightly frowned, put the knife on his waist, and walked in front of him. He said condescendingly, Yi Su's death is a good thing. The drunkard said, now it seems that both the academy and Taoism want to weaken Haotian, so Yi Su's death is not necessarily a good thing. The butcher asked, what do you mean? I didn't understand it at first, until I saw Li Man Man passing by Chang and without entering. Then I thought of a possibility. A touch of fear flashed in the drunkard's eyes, and he said, he left Chang and city and disappeared without a trace. The Chen Mao left Peach Mountain, and no one knows where he went. What do they want to do? What is more important than the entire human world? The butcher was a man of few words, and he looked a little clumsy and sometimes timid. But in fact, he never lacked wisdom. He quickly figured out that what was more important than the entire human world was, of course, the divine kingdom. He raised his head and looked through the broken asbestos tiles above the butcher's shop to the dark sky, as if he wanted to see clearly what was going on in the divine kingdom. The headmaster and Haotian had been fighting there for several years, and no news had been transmitted to the human world. There was no thunder, no rain, no hurricane, and no oracle. However, it was destined to be the most important battle since the birth of this world. It would determine the direction of the human world. As the saying goes, the peach and plum do not speak, the bottom will naturally form its own path. If the mountains do not speak, the autumn wind will naturally avoid it. Well, these metaphors were not appropriate. The butcher and the drunkard could naturally sense that the headmaster did not have any advantage in that battle, and the bright moon was gradually dimming. He sat down in front of the drunkard, picked up the bucket beside him, and began to drink. Only endless clear water could slightly calm the anxiety in his heart. That was the anxiety caused by anxiety. The Abbey Dean and Li Man were both missing. What were they looking for in the human world? What they were looking for was more important than the entire human world, and that was the divine kingdom, or in other words, the great existence that everyone thought had returned to the divine kingdom. Let alone the academy, what would the Abbey Dean do after finding that existence? Everything he did pointed to something bad. The more the butcher thought about it, the more frightened he became. Did someone really dare to kill Haotian? This thought was like a bone-paring knife grinding on his body, making him itch to the extreme, pain to the extreme, terror to the extreme, and unease to the extreme. After an unknown period of time, he finally put down the bucket of water. The water that had entered his body turned into sweat and flowed out, drenching his oily clothes and leather apron. It dripped to the ground and flowed again, but the water carried a faint smell of blood. Even if Haotian really did not return to the divine kingdom, why did he kill her? Why did he dare to kill her? Why did he kill her? As for why, I don't understand. Even if the new stream would weaken her, even if she could not help her in the divine kingdom because of the headmaster, how could he defeat her? His arrogance makes me uneasy and puzzled. The drunkard said with a pale face, as for why he killed her, I dare not think about it. I think even Buddha would not dare to think like that. Butcher's expression was extremely ugly, and he shouted, he is actually audacious to the extreme. The drunkard said bitterly, when was he ever timid? I will spend this month with all of you. Shake hands. Chapter 1078. The butcher was silent. He recalled that years ago, the Abbey Dean sent the drunkard to the West Wilderness to meet the chief monk of Scripture. He was also trying to harm her. She is indeed the most powerful person in Taoism in 1,000 years. The butcher stood up, wiped the water stains off his clothes, and sighed. The drunkard looked at him and said, what should we do? Or rather, what should we choose? The butcher said, don't forget that there are 2 Haotians now. If she did not return to the divine kingdom and was still in the human world, then there would be one in heaven and one in the human world. But no one knew which one was the real one. If I follow the wishes of the one in heaven, the chances of success will be very high. But I don't know if the one in heaven will fulfill the agreement between us and the one in the human world. So we can't let the one in the human world die. The drunkard and the butcher had lived for too long, so they were afraid of death. When the light of Haotian shrouded the human world, they hid like rats. When the headmaster found them, they remained silent. When the headmaster ascended to heaven and the Abbey Dean landed, they remained silent. They never had the courage to rise up. But they still had greed, which was like the combination of countless human instincts. It was so strong and so unwilling. They wanted eternity. Eternity did not belong to the human world, but to the divine kingdom. They got Sang Sang's promise or gift, so they calmed down and became happy, no longer guarding the boring life of the past tens of thousands of years. Until now, they found that there might be two Haotians. This had happened before. When Sang Sang traveled with Ning Ke in the human world, or even earlier, when she lived with Ning Ke in the city of Wei in the Min Mountain, there had always been two Haotians. But one of them did not wake up. When she woke up, she and the one in the Divine Kingdom were inseparable. But the Abbey Dean's recent behavior indicated that, the one who did not return to the Divine Kingdom and the one who stayed in the Divine Kingdom had stepped into different rivers. In that case, was the agreement between them still valid? What did the Haotian in the Divine Kingdom think? Who should they follow? The butcher looked at the drunkard and said seriously, "Fortunately, there are two of us. If there are really two Haotians, then, we can each guard one." The drunkard stood up and said, "That's the only way. Even if we make a wrong choice, we won't lose everything. We can still do something at the last moment." The butcher said, "You go too." The drunkard said, "Of course." The butcher said, "If she hasn't returned to the Divine Kingdom and is still in the human world, you must find her before the Abbey Dean and Li Man Man." The drunkard said, "What about you?" The butcher walked back to the chopping board and threw the trotters into the pot. Looking at the trotters floating in the brine, he said, "I'm going to Peach Mountain. If Haotian Taoism is really acting according to the will of the Divine Kingdom, then they need my help." Other than the painting and calligraphy shop, the butcher shop, and the wine shop, there was also a gambling house in the town. There were not many people living in the town, and there were very few wealthy families. There were also relatively few lazy gamblers, so the business of the gambling stalls had never been good. However, this did not affect the fact that many men in the town came to report every day and never got tired of it. Zhang San and Li Si stood in front of the table, looking at the chips and patterns of different sizes, listening to the dealers shout and smelling the fragrance of cosmetics and alcohol around them. They were very excited. Li Si liked to fool around when he was in Chang'an, so he was not a good boy. Zhang San was also very competitive in his hometown. He had broken the heads of many villagers for his mother's sake. Moreover, they had only been in the academy for a short time, so they did not have the chance to receive Li Manman's moral education and Jun Mo's stick education. Therefore, they had no resistance to gambling. Why do we always lose? After losing a few more copper coins, Li Si gritted his teeth and said bitterly, "I don't believe it's a technical problem, and it can't be a problem of intelligence." Zhang San reminded him, "We played a few rounds with the youngest uncle, but didn't we always lose?" The youngest uncle said, "It's a problem of character. Is our character not good enough? If not, why would the teacher choose us? Are you the Prime Minister's son, or am I the princess's brother?" Li Si said angrily. He took out a handful of broken silver and stuffed half of it into Zhang San's hand. Then, he slammed it on the table. "Take it with both hands. I'll bet on the big one, you bet on the small one. Someone will win." Not long after, Zhang San and Li Si left the gambling house sulkily and went back to the shop with their heads down. Chao Xiaoshu was washing the chess pieces with clean water. Seeing their expressions, he knew they had lost all again. He smiled and asked about the situation. "Betting on both sides will definitely lose. People who do this are really stupid." Chao Xiaoshu said with a smile, but his eyes did not fall on Zhang San and Li Si. Instead, he looked over their shoulders at the butcher's shop on the other side of the street. Zhang San and Li Si looked very calm, no longer cursing like before. It seemed that they did not care about the broken silver they lost in the gambling house at all. To go to the gambling house, they had to pass the butcher's shop. They could hear the people in the butcher's shop talking. Yes, the people in the shop must know, but Zhang Nianzu was just Zhang San, and Li Guangdi was just Li Si. They were just ordinary people, just like their names. Who would care? "I'll write a letter." Chao Xiaoshu walked to the backyard. In the butcher's shop, the butcher and the drunkard sat facing each other in silence amidst the clean water and the faint smell of blood. They had said what they wanted to say, but they could not calm down immediately. All of a sudden, the butcher raised his eyebrows. The knife in his belt whistled through the air. He held it in his hand and held it horizontally in front of his face. His body reacted faster and he had already squatted behind the chopping board. His expression was extremely serious, which was reflected on the shiny surface of the knife. He felt extreme danger. He had felt the same kind of danger several years ago during the right to light on the Peach Mountain. Today, the danger came again. The drunkard stood up with his long gown fluttering. It seemed that he would disappear in the wind in the next moment. They both felt the threat from Changpan. The direction the iron arrow was pointing at was moving slowly in the human world, following that person's line of sight. Who was Ning Ke going to shoot? Blood and corpses were everywhere in Yangzhou City. The blood had solidified and turned black. The corpses were covered with snow, but they did not rot immediately. The Fuchin River outside the city was also covered with blood. Corpses were floating on the clear water. It was a shocking scene. A sacred sedan was by the river, facing the direction of the verdant canyon. Hunmu Liren sat on the sedan with his legs crossed. His young face was expressionless. But everyone could see his pride from his slightly raised lips and bright eyes. He had led the papal cavalrymen of the divine halls of West Hill to kill countless people in Qinghe Prefecture. The beautiful bridges and flowing water had been dyed red by blood. The green trees in the fields were aging rapidly. Magpies were rare and crows were perched on the branches. He was proud of his achievements and his power. He looked at the verdant canyon that was vaguely visible in the distance and stretched out his hands toward the sky. When Jun Mo fought against 10,000 enemies and shocked the world, he was just an insignificant woodcutter in the Revelation Institute. He regretted that he did not make it to the great battle. He was even more regretful that Jun Mo had lost an arm. So what was the point of winning the battle now? As he thought of this, the regret gradually turned into pride. All the emotions in Hunmu Liren's body eventually turned into pride, as if it was the imprint left by Haotian on him. All of a sudden, he raised his eyebrows and waved his hand. A gust of wind rose from the Fuchin River, carrying with it a faint smell of blood. The heavy gauze curtains in front of the sacred sedan fell off. One layer of muslin, 2 layers of muslin, and countless more layers of muslin quickly fell down one after another, covering his figure in the innermost depths. His subordinates beside the carriage and the devout believers in the fields could no longer see his face, nor could they share his glory and pride. Hunmu Liren did not like it, but he had to do it. He even had to be vigilant and restrain his aura so that his Taoist heart could be as peaceful as a dry well. Because if he insisted on his pride, he would be seen by that person. Even if that person could not see him, he would still be worried that he would be noticed. That was why he had to keep a low profile. Was it humility? No, humility was a kind of active virtue, and he was passive and low-key, so this was a kind of humiliation, a complete and utter humiliation. Behind the heavy gauze curtains, Hunmu Liren lowered his head. His young face was flushed with anger. He moved his lips and murmured with indescribable hatred, "Come out if you can, come out if you can, come out if you can." After leaving the capital of the Kingdom of Song, Long Qin led his subordinates and more than 2,000 papal cavalrymen of the divine halls of West Hill to the north. They returned to capital Cheng and met up with the papal cavalrymen who had been stationed here for years. The Emperor of Yen was in charge of the state affairs. He trusted his brother's ability and did not have the energy to deal with those trivial matters. His eyes were fixed on the north, on the eastern wilderness where he had risen again, and on the ghost-like peerless powerhouse. Yu Lian's purge of the eastern wilderness was coming to an end. The divine halls of West Hill had tried many times to stop her, but to no avail. Instead, they lost more powerhouses. In the end, they could only cover their eyes and pretend that they did not see anything. But he could not pretend that he did not see anything. It was not because the eastern wilderness was the place where he had risen again and he had feelings for it. It was because the Yen kingdom was to the south of the eastern wilderness. When the desolate man tribe moved south again, the Yen kingdom would be the first to be destroyed. Suddenly, Long Qing withdrew his gaze from the grassland and looked in the direction of Chang'an City. Just a moment ago, he felt a wave similar to divine awareness passing through Qingjing City. The divine consciousness was similar to the psyche power. No one in the cultivation world could have such a powerful psyche power. Even Liu Bai, once the most powerful person in the world, could not sweep through the entire human world with his psyche power. Then whose divine consciousness was it? Long Qing knew it was Ning Kei's. When he received Sangsang's divine flame, or when he had the entire Chang and as the source, only Ning Kei could sense an ocean and his divine consciousness could sweep through the entire human world. Long Qing was silent, but he was not as embarrassed as the butcher. He was calm and did not seem to care. He was not like the drunkard who was ready to use the limitless escape at any time. Because he did not know the limitless escape, and because he was not going to leave. There were only 3 people in the cultivation world who survived Ning Kei's 13 primordial arrows, the chief preaching monk of Xiankong Temple, Yi Hongyu, and him. Among them, he was the only one who had truly experienced the terror of the iron arrow. The hole in his chest and abdomen was still telling the story of that year. He was too familiar with the iron arrow and knew many things about it. Even with the help of Tianqi and Chang'an, Ning Kei could see everything in the human world. But he still needed someone to help him locate a place in the human world. In other words, he needed someone to push his target to the peak state. These were all calculated by Long Qing. So he was not worried, because Mr. First should have left the human world. But he still remained silent. After all, it was the 13 primordial arrows. A gentleman must shoot when he has nothing to fight for. The academy was very particular about shooting. When Ning Kei was ready to shoot, the entire world was silent. Even the most powerful cultivator, the most confident and narcissistic powerhouse, did not want to be his target. The iron arrow might not be enough to kill someone like the butcher, but no one dared to take the risk. During the Right to Light that year, the powerhouse in the Knowing Destiny state from Qinghe Prefecture died, and so did Elder Cui, who was worshipped by all the clans. They were both killed by an arrow. Ning Kei looked at the human world. His eyes moved across the vast wilderness, mountains, and rivers. The iron arrow moved along with him, and finally landed in the depths of the wilderness in the west. There was nothing there. There was no battle, and he couldn't sense any special light spots in his sea of consciousness. It was too far away, as if he was at the end of the world. Even when his divine sense reached there, it became extremely faint and hard to distinguish. But he still aimed there quietly, because he had to do something. He had to do it when the Abbey Dean disappeared in the snow and wind, and before he left Chang'an. As Long Qing calculated, his iron arrow needed the eldest brother's cooperation. In front of the imperial palace in Lincoln, he and the eldest brother prepared to kill the drunkard in this way. Even though they failed, they still posed a great threat to the drunkard and caused a great disturbance after that, until Yi Su died in the small courtyard by the East Sea. The 13 primordial arrows in the most powerful state could threaten all the powerhouses. But it needed the entire Chang'an to provide him with power and cooperation. But many people forgot that it was not the eldest brother who cooperated with Ning Kei when he used the iron arrow to kill people from 1,000 miles away. That day in the garden by the Fuchin River, the person who had taken a step forward and announced his name had shocked old Master Cui to the point of releasing his full realm without hesitation, was June Mo. The snow and wind in the wilderness stopped for a few days. Suddenly, it started falling again, and it became more and more violent. The Golden Tribe royal court marched south in the snow and wind. Every adult man in the grassland tribes was the best cavalryman. Now the northern battlefront army was fighting against hundreds of thousands of elites. On the western grassland, the snow and wind were equally violent. The right royal court sent out all the best cavalrymen. They were far away from the central plains and had not fought for many years. They did not go south to the Ueluan kingdom, nor did they take the risk of returning to the east to the horrible quagmire. Instead, they headed for the farther west. The bitter cold weather and the difficult supply of food did not make them hesitate. Because they were going to a place called Xiankong Temple. Chapter 1079. First of all, today's chapter has been updated. I've written a lot, 10,000 words. It's the most I've written in a year. The reason for this is naturally because I'm having a good time writing. I can't stop taking medicine, nor can I stop writing. Secondly, I'm very satisfied with today's chapter. When I wrote it, it felt very grand. Thirdly, some readers are asking about the goal of the monthly votes. I really don't want everyone to work hard. I don't want to work hard either. In any case, I just have to work hard and write seriously. But I have to tell the truth, don't talk nonsense and be humble. Of course, the higher the better. There's no need to be polite about this kind of thing. Anyway, it's only this month. What's the point of going through so much trouble? Just happily ask for it. Finally, I really didn't want to write a separate chapter, but after writing this chapter, I felt that it would be a pity not to do so. Also, I felt that I was thinking too much, and it really didn't seem grand. That kind of me didn't match the great temperament of the ending of the night. Alright, I want to write a separate chapter, because I want the monthly votes. Yes, they all want me to act cute. I poked my chubby cheeks with my fingers and furrowed my brows in thought. What exactly is the act of acting cute? Please vote for the monthly votes. Thank you. Chapter 1080. This was the deepest part of the Prajna Peak. Whether it was the peak, the plateau, or the bottom of the giant sinkhole, the distance was more than 10 miles. There was no difference. The sound on the surface of the mountain couldn't reach here. The sound of the underground river couldn't reach here. There would be no sound here. It was as silent as a tomb. The chief monk looked at the 2 iron arrows in his chest and felt the clear pain. He remembered that he hadn't felt this way for many years. It was fresh and vivid. A self-deprecating emotion appeared on his old face. He had cultivated Buddhism for countless years and reached the peak of the Vajrabhati. He thought that after the headmaster of the academy ascended to heaven, no one could threaten him anymore. Who would have thought that he would be defeated by 2 disciples of the academy a few years ago and a few years later? Do you think you can imprison me like this? You won't be able to drink or eat, you won't be able to hear any sound or see any light. You'll be weak and old, starved to death, or driven mad by despair. You might be able to survive, or even break free from these 2 iron arrows and walk out of the dark cave with unparalleled willpower. But by then, the Buddhist land that you've been protecting will have been destroyed by my iron sword. Jun Mo's words were not a threat or intimidation. Threats and intimidation had never been his fighting style. He was just stating the facts. It was only because it was a fact that he stated it so calmly that it was really terrifying. No food or drink, no sound, no light, lonely, isolated from the world. What kind of torture was that? No one had experienced it except Lotus. Even Lotus almost went crazy from the torture. What would happen to the chief monk of scripture in the end? The chief monk put his palms together with difficulty and looked at Jun Mo with pity. He said, "Buddha is merciful." He should have felt sorry for his own miserable experience and felt sad for the years or even decades of living in hell. But he felt sorry for the other party and the choice of the academy. If it was someone else, they might reflect on themselves or even feel ashamed when facing the chief monk's calm and compassionate eyes. But Jun Mo was different. Buddha is merciful, but the academy is not. Arrogant and disgusting. Jun Mo said expressionlessly, for countless years, the Buddha land has turned countless living people into white bones and enslaved countless souls. The mountains are built with human bones and the golden top is painted with human blood. Is this the wonderful nirvana? This is the netherworld. Destroying everything and killing you and these bald donkeys is the true mercy. After saying this, he didn't say anything else. He turned around and walked out of the cliff cave. He casually flicked his sleeves, and the iron sword broke through the air again, cutting off countless cliff stones and blocking the passage. Wind, rain, light, and air couldn't enter. Ning Ke waited on the city wall for 3 days and 3 nights. The entire human world also waited for 3 days and 3 nights. Both the butcher and the small town and Hengmu in Qinghe Prefecture were silent for 3 days and 3 nights, waiting to see where his arrow would go. In the past, it was possible that he would not shoot the iron arrow. The so-called killing weapon was the most threatening when it was not used. Moreover, once it was used, it would break the balance between the two sides, so Ning Ke did not dare to act rashly. But now it was different. The Abbey Dean left the Peach Mountain and disappeared. The drunkard no longer kept an eye on the academy. The balance in the cultivation world had been broken. More importantly, the human world had sensed Ning Ke's anxiety, so he would definitely shoot him today. 2 holes appeared outside the city of Chang'an. They were not tunnels formed by the tearing of space, nor were they real arrow holes. They were just condensed clouds formed by the iron arrows. The 2 condensed clouds extended to the west and disappeared after dozens of miles. It was enough for people to see where the arrows were pointing. 2 perfectly straight lines of clouds appeared in the azure sky. It was just like the rainbow that had appeared in the sky from the ground all those years ago. It was an extremely rare spectacle. Many people in Chang'an brought the old and the young to the street to watch. They discussed excitedly and guessed which powerful enemy Mr. 13 had killed. The debate in the tea house was even more intense. Some said it was Chanyu of the Golden Tribe Royal Court. Some said it was the little slave named Ada, a gift from Haotian to the human world. The Tang Empire was the enemy of the whole world since the beginning of the war. People were dying at the border every moment. The people were inevitably depressed and gloomy. Today, the 2 clouds of arrows finally succeeded in invigorating them, and they even felt like celebrating. Ning Ke was also looking at the 2 condensed clouds in the sky. The sunlight fell on his face, making him look paler. He could not hide the joy in his eyes. The 2 iron arrows consumed a lot of his energy, but also brought him a lot. Some of the cultivation tools were legendary weapons, such as the chessboard left by Buddha, the Yulan bell, some sacred weapons recorded in the scriptures of Haotian Taoism, and the tomes of arcane that had just begun to show their terrible power in the human world. Of course, the Chang'an city left by the headmaster of the academy should not be forgotten. But most of those weapons were gifts from heaven, or the remains of people like Buddha. Weapons made by cultivators that could show the power of the legendary level were very rare. Now, except for the river and mountain sandbox made by the former sages of the academy and the masters of the Black Ink Garden, there were only the primordial 13 arrows. Up to now, Ning Ke's iron arrow had already shocked the world. All cultivators knew that it was a terrifying killing weapon, but only the people at the back of the mountain of the academy truly understood the principle behind it and why the iron arrow had such unimaginable power. The power of the primordial 13 arrows lay in Ning Ke's original whimsical idea and the incredible practical ability of the people of the academy. Its strength lay in the fact that it was a talisman arrow. Everyone thought that the primordial 13 arrows were arrows, but they were not. The talisman arrow was not an arrow, but a talisman. Or, the primordial 13 arrows should be regarded as an arrow talisman. Every time the iron arrow shot into the human world, it meant that Ning Ke had written a talisman in the human world. The moment the iron arrow left the bowstring, the talisman on the shaft was engraved, but it did not mean that the talisman was finished. On the contrary, it was the first stroke of the real talisman. Only when the iron arrow appeared before the target, the last stroke would fall there, and then Ning Kai could say that the talisman was finished. The talisman was a whole, and it was not finished without any stroke. The process of Ning Kai shooting the arrow was also a whole. From the moment the iron arrow left the bowstring to hitting the target, it could not be cut. So once the iron arrow was shot, it was powerful and indestructible. The big talisman written by the iron arrow was a whole, and naturally did not need the concept of time and space. So its performance was even more unimaginable than the limitless state. At the same time, because the talisman was interconnected from the beginning to the end, Ning Kai did not need to look. He only needed to know where the last stroke should fall, and then he could make the iron arrow fall there. In his sense of perception, when he was writing the talisman, Chang and city in the distant west wilderness were essentially connected. The talisman was only finished when the arrow landed on the cliff plateau and appeared in front of the chief preaching monk. Even space could not cut the talisman, nor could it stop the iron arrow. Coupled with the power of Chang and city, what could the indestructible Buddha body do? When the Academy first developed the primordial 13 arrows, no one really understood the principle behind it. Jun Mo could not understand it, and neither could Ning Quebec. It was not until a long time later, when he shot Elder Chui to death at the right to light, that he vaguely understood it. Today, on the city wall of Chang and city, he shot 2 arrows toward the western wilderness, and he learned how to write this kind of big talisman. He knew that this was very important to him, even more important than shooting the chief preaching monk. Because this was the expectation of his teacher Yen Sei before he died, and it was also what he was destined to do. Of course, as Long Qing had calculated, the primordial 13 arrows needed to be coordinated. He and Jun Mo were thousands of miles apart, and before the iron arrow appeared, it could not send any information in advance during the process of writing the talisman. He could only wait and hope that second brother could calculate what he wanted, and hope that he could see the chief preaching monk in his sense of perception. Jun Mo had been fighting in the underground world for several years, but he had only broken through the mountain once and fought with the chief monk of scripture once. Ning Kai's expectation seemed to be extravagant or wishful thinking, but he did it anyway. He waited for 3 days and 3 nights. It turned out that Ning Kai was right. He and Jun Mo had no contact with each other, but they naturally had a tacit understanding and knew each other's mind. Just like the iron arrow talisman, no one could cut it off. Ning Kai did not know the current situation in Xiankong Temple, and did not know whether the chief preaching monk had been seriously injured by his iron arrow. But he could clearly feel that his 2 arrow talismans were written perfectly, so second brother would definitely do the rest well. His only regret was that the 2 iron arrows had seriously damaged him. Even with his current state, it was difficult for him to carry the power of Chang and to the far west. At this time, the God-stunning array was constantly replenishing his psyche power, but he could not shoot 2 iron arrows as powerful as before in a short period of time. Otherwise, he would have shot all the iron arrows in the quiver until he killed the chief preaching monk. No one knew better than him how important it was to help second brother destroy the Buddha land as soon as possible. Jun Mo had held up the entire Buddhism sect, the Right King's palace, and the Yueluan kingdom in the West Wilderness. It seemed that he had shouldered a heavy burden for the Academy and the Tang Empire, but Ning Kai hoped that he could return to Chang'an. The iron sword should be wielded on a bigger stage, and his iron sword should be used to kill stronger powerhouses, such as the person who was walking toward Peach Mountain. Ning Kai looked away from the 2 clouds in the sky and turned to the east. Just when everyone thought he would put away the bow, he pulled the bow again and shot an arrow toward the east without any warning. Many people of Chang'an were watching from below the city wall. Because the city wall was too high, they could not see what was happening above, but they could vaguely see Ning Kai's movements. Seeing that he suddenly pulled the bow again, the people below the city wall suddenly exclaimed. Black masses of people surged toward this direction like a tide, wanting to see more clearly. The crowd suddenly became silent. They watched the iron arrow leave the bowstring, and with a light clang, it disappeared in the cold winter wind. Boom! Tens of thousands of people shouted in unison. They were shocked and exclaimed that they had no regrets witnessing this scene with their own eyes. They were also cheering for the master of the academy. A clear and straight cold cloud appeared in the blue sky again, as if the iron arrow had torn a path in the chi of heaven and earth and even the heaven and earth itself. But in fact it was the iron arrow that had created a path between heaven and earth, a path that did not belong to heaven and earth. That was the way of connecting the strokes of the talisman arrow. The talisman arrow was the talisman arrow, and Ning Kei's talisman ended in the faraway capital Cheng. It was snowing in capital Cheng of the Yen kingdom. Pure white snowflakes kept falling from the dark leaden clouds. And in the depths of the clouds, faint cyan lightning flashed from time to time. Some of the lightning even penetrated the clouds and came to the desolate fields along with the falling snow. Thunder in winter, rain and snow in summer, wind and snow were common in this season, but lightning was extremely rare. The scene was extremely strange, as if there was great danger or some kind of power shuttling in it. Long Qing brushed off the snow on his shoulders and looked into the depths of the clouds outside the city. His eyes passed through the falling snowflakes and fell on those high places. He looked a little solemn. Vaguely, he saw a cyan robe fluttering by. But the snow was too thick and the lightning was too dense. He could not be sure whether what he saw was real or an illusion. Suddenly, a faint shadow passed through the snowstorm in the high sky. Several lightning brushed past the figure and struck down. It looked extremely dangerous and the scene was extremely shocking. Long Qing was sure that what he saw this time was real, because the figure flew to the top of the city wall of capital Cheng. He even vaguely smelled a burning smell. Eldest brother's cotton-padded clothes were scorched by the bolts of lightning in the clouds. If he had reacted a little slower, he might have already bid farewell to this world. Even so, he looked extremely disheveled. The cotton in the torn cotton-padded clothes and the blood that flowed out were smeared together in a messy manner. It was a very unsightly sight. Long Qing suddenly became serious. The snowflakes around him suddenly swung away. He grabbed the snow with his right hand and a very dark black peach blossom appeared in front of him to protect him. In the capital of the Kingdom of Song, Mr. First did not attack him because the drunkard was beside him and also because he had the tomes of arcane in his hand. At this time, the tomes of arcane were still in his arms. But he was sure that Li Man would attack him. Anyone could understand that Mr. First, who risked his life to escape from the state of limitless and appeared in capital Cheng, would definitely do something. As Long Qing expected, the eldest brother flew to the top of the city wall with a seemingly ordinary stick in his hand. He hit Long Qing's head with it. Long Qing did not dare to hesitate. He held the black peach blossom in his right hand and held the remnant of the arcane tome of the sand in his left hand. He was ready to fight at any time. The seemingly ordinary stick actually had a long history. It was a Buddhist commandment stick made by the headmaster after he founded the academy. It was specially used to beat disobedient students. After the headmaster ascended to heaven, the Buddhist commandment stick was naturally given to the eldest brother. The Buddhist commandment stick had beaten the Abbey Dean to the South Sea for decades. It had also beaten the Yueluan kingdom king to death in the wilderness in front of the Pamir Mountains. Just like the original use of the stick, it was natural for a teacher to beat a student. How could a student avoid it? Since it could not be avoided, it was usually unavoidable. Long Qing knew that he could not avoid the stick, so he could only use the peach blossom to block it. He had the psyche power and essence of thousands of Taoism cultivators in his body. In terms of quantity, he was invincible. But facing Mr. First's stick, he did not dare to underestimate it. He released all his states without hesitation. The stick fell on the peach blossom. The peach blossom naturally withered. The masters and disciples of the academy always liked to mess with the peach blossoms of Taoism. The headmaster cut off all the peach blossoms on the mountain, so there would be successors. Long Qing's face became extremely pale, and the scar became very clear. It was not as inconspicuous as it usually was, but looked very ferocious. His arms kept trembling, and his feet were deeply stuck in the city wall. He could not free himself. The black peach blossom dispersed, and countless powders with the substantial qi of heaven and earth blew in all directions. The protruding bricks on the city wall were all blown into powder. Eldest brother did not stop. He disappeared in the snow again, passing through the horrible lightning, and chased after the cyan robe. Long Qing looked calm, but there was a deep fear in his eyes. He knew that the cyan robe he saw at the beginning was real. Mr. First was chasing after the Abbey Dean. He saw Long Qing on the city wall of Qingjing City and suddenly came out to hit him with the stick. A casual strike from the staff had forced him to unleash his entire cultivation realm. If Mr. First were to strike him with all his might, would he be able to withstand it? Long Qing thought about these questions, but he did not know that there was a more serious problem waiting for him. He did not notice that the wind and snow outside the city wall seemed to have stopped for a moment. An arrow came from Chang'an. An iron arrow appeared in front of Long Qing. Long Qing's face was extremely pale, but now it became red, as if the blood flowing in his veins had suddenly sped up. His blood began to burn at this moment, and the consciousness left by countless predecessors of Taoism began to help him react in the shortest time possible. Another black peach blossom bloomed in front of his chest. Compared to the previous one, this black peach was much smaller. It was sparkling and translucent, like the most precious of gems. Its petals trembled in the wind, looking extremely pitiful and pitiful. In fact, this seemingly fragile little spade was actually terrifying. The petals were flowing with the infinite aura of quietus, and countless strange auras of the psyche power. The iron arrow shot on the rustling peach blossom. There was a hole in Long Qing's chest and abdomen, which was made by Ning Kei's primordial 13 arrows. This seemingly weak black peach blossom was born from that hole. This black peach blossom was not his natal peach blossom, but his second life. This time, Long Qing did not intend to let the iron arrow pierce through him again. The moment the black peach blossom blocked the iron arrow, his hands had already appeared in the air in front of him, tightly holding the shaft of the iron arrow. An unimaginable power came from the dark iron arrow. Long Qing's 10 fingers grasped the qi of heaven and earth in the wilderness, but he still could not control it. On the contrary, his hands were instantly torn apart, and blood began to drip down. Just when the first drop of blood was about to leave the shaft, another pair of hands fell on the shaft of the iron arrow. It was a pair of pale, inhuman hands. It was still Long Qing's hands. Behind Long Qing, a vague outline of a human figure appeared. It was very blurry in the wind and snow, as if it could be blown away at any time. The second pair of hands still could not stop the iron arrow. Long Qing roared, and suddenly there were countless figures in the wind and snow behind him. Those figures were very faint, and in the sunlight, it was impossible to see their details. He could only be sure that they were all humans, and they all followed his will. In the roar, those figures collectively reached out their hands, like hungry ghosts in pain looking for food, or like sinners seeking relief. They reached out to the iron arrow. Continue to work hard, please continue to support me. Chapter 1081. Hundreds of hands fell on the iron arrow. Some of the hands were covered in rotten boils, some of the hands were as thin as firewood, and most of the hands were only left with bones. The color of the bones was also very gloomy, not white, but rather gray. The iron arrow was finally stopped by hundreds of broken hands. But the power of the God-stunning array still fell on Long Qing through the hundreds of hands. He took people's divine sense and souls and used the hands of hundreds of dead people. Naturally, he had to bear all the power from those hands, whether it was victory or hostility. The power of the iron arrow was like a flood. Because of the final pause, it was released in an instant without any leakage. Long Qing retreated quickly on the city wall. His feet were like plows, cutting countless bricks on the city wall and leaving 2 deep ravines. The city wall of Qingjing City was 7 miles long. He retreated 7 miles, leaving a ravine of 7 miles on the city wall. Finally, he couldn't stand still. He broke through the arrow mound on the city wall and fell down heavily in the flying bricks and stones. With a swish, the last remaining power flew away with the iron arrow. No one knew where it went. The papal cavalrymen of the West Hill Divine Palace near the city wall heard the strange sound and hurried to help. It took them a lot of effort to pull Long Qing out of the stones and wood on the ground. Long Qing's face was pale like a dead man. He was about to say something, but then he covered his mouth and coughed painfully. In the eyes of the cavalrymen of the Divine Hall, he was like a god. They had never seen him like this. The people under the city wall suddenly fell into a dead silence. After a while, Long Qing finally calmed down a little. He looked at the sky where the iron arrow had disappeared and was deep in thought. There was no fear in his eyes at all. Suddenly, the wind and snow all over the sky stopped, as if Haotian was showing a miracle. At the last moment, the lightning in the clouds became extremely dense, like the reflection of a dying patient, which made people on the ground feel awe. Only Long Qing could see the cotton-padded jacket appeared again, covered with dust, above the clouds. Then there was a green robe fluttering in the distance, reflecting the beautiful sunlight, like an immortal. The 2 figures disappeared quickly. The next moment, the drunkard appeared. He looked at the direction where the 2 disappeared and turned to Long Qing with a complicated look, as if he wanted to do something. Long Qing remained calm and slightly bowed to the drunkard. The drunkard was silent for a while and then disappeared without doing anything. Until then, Long Qing was completely relaxed and his face became pale again. The strange phenomenon in the north of Yen Kingdom today was the aftermath of the chase of the 3 powerhouses of the limitless state. The Abbey Dean, the eldest brother, and the drunkard, especially the first 2, were too close to each other. They formed turbulence in the interlayer of the chi of heaven and earth, which the lightning and of the wind and snow came from. What happened today would be repeated in the human world in the future. It would evolve into many fairy tales and frighten many ordinary people. Long Qing knew that the chase would not stop until one of the 3 found her first, and the disorder of the chi of heaven and earth would stop. For the 3, it was the most important and decisive thing. It would not matter even if the human world became a sea of fire. That was why the drunkard wanted to kill him, but he did not do it. Facing the drunkard's killing intent, Long Qing was very calm. Only in this way could he avoid a head-on fight with the drunkard. He did not think that he could defeat the real legend in the cultivation world. But his calmness also came from his confidence. He knew that his master would be the final winner in this shocking limitless pursuit. The drunkard started late, and the eldest brother could not ignore the joys and sorrows of the human world like the Abbey Dean and the drunkard. As long as he cared about the human world, he could not really leave. In this limitless pursuit, only a few people knew about it, but it would change the whole history. Just as Long Qing predicted, the eldest brother was at a disadvantage from the beginning. Maybe it was for this reason that he showed up in Qingjing City and hit Long Qing. He wanted to see if he could make the Abbey Dean stop for a moment, and he also wanted to do something to solve some problems for the academy and his younger brothers and sisters. Unfortunately, just like what he sensed in Lingang City and the capital of the Kingdom of Song, Long Qing was very powerful now. It would be hard to kill him if he did not concentrate. This assassination against Long Qing was not the result of the academy's plan. It was a spontaneous decision. Ning Kei's arrow was shot because he sensed the anomaly in the east. At that time, his spirit and boldness had been used up in the first 2 arrows. Naturally, it was difficult to kill him. But he still shot. He wanted to see how powerful Long Qing was now, because he did not want to miss such an opportunity. Long Qing was definitely the one who knew Ning Ke best in this world. Although Ning Ke had never regarded him as the so-called lifelong enemy, he knew a lot about him. Through Yi Hongyu and Cheng Lixue, he knew many things that Long Qing had experienced, whether it was the gray eyes cultivation method, betraying Taoism, or sucking the consciousness and cultivation of many powerhouses from the Divine Hall in the Yu prison. So he wanted to test Long Qing. Ning Ke felt it was a pity that the iron arrow did not kill Long Qing, but he did not care too much. Just like what Jun Emo said to the chief monk of scripture on the cliff plateau, except for a few people, the academy never thought that there was no one who could not be killed. If he did not kill him today, he would wait until tomorrow. Thank you, senior brothers. Ning Ke bowed to the west and then to the east. He dismantled the iron bow and put it into the box. He tidied up his luggage and clothes and walked to the side of the city wall. He remembered that he saw the Empress jump down here many years ago. She was so resolute and happy at that time. Yes, sometimes one should be resolute in doing things, so that one could find happiness. Thinking of this, Ning Ke turned around and bowed to Chang An again. Then he jumped down from the city wall. A moment later, a dull crash sounded outside the city wall. Gravel flew everywhere, and smoke and dust rose. When the dust settled, a big pit appeared on the ground outside the city. Ning Ke's figure had disappeared. This was the coldest winter in 1,000 years. The wind and snow swept across the whole continent, and even the harbor of Yu Kingdom was frozen. In this winter, the West Hill Divine Palace completely suppressed the new stream. The former world wayfarer of Haotian Taoism, Yi Su, was burned to death in the capital of the Kingdom of Song. The great divine priest of judgment, Yi Hongyu, betrayed Haotian Taoism. The chief monk of scripture of Xiankong Temple was trapped in the depths of the Prajna Peak, and no one knew when he could get out. Jun Mo waved the iron sword and continued his battle in the underground world with tens of thousands of slaves. The dawn was getting closer and closer, and victory was in sight. But at the same time, the elite cavalry of the Right King's Palace and the reinforcements of the White Tower Temple were also approaching. Yu Lian and Tang led the desolate man's tribe in the eastern wilderness for the last time. Ning Ke, who was supposed to guard Chang An, suddenly left. No one knew where he went. The Abbey Dean, Chen Mao, the eldest brother of the academy, and the drunkard were missing. The three most powerful cultivators in the limitless state disappeared at the same time. No one found any trace of them in the human world, and no one knew where they went. Even though the whole human world was disturbed by the whereabouts of these powerful cultivators, the human world had to return to the human world, and the war was still going on. The cold winter was finally over, and it was the early spring of the next year. The Tang Empire, besieged by the whole world, faced the war silently and firmly. The war in the Yan Kingdom was in a stalemate. The Tang Empire lacked war horses, and the number of cavalry was much less than in previous years. It was difficult for them to take the risk and attack with full force. The journey of the desolate man's tribe to the south was also greatly hindered. The left king's palace, which was already in decline, had received strong support from the divine halls, especially from Long Qing and more than 2,000 cavalrymen of the divine halls. The Helan city in the depths of the Tianqi Mountains had not been opened, and the elusive Yu Lian did not appear in the golden tent. Maybe it had something to do with these things. To the relief of the Tang Empire, Taoism seemed to be facing more problems. The great divine priest of judgment, Yi Hongyu, was still alive. She kept meeting the devout believers in the Great River Kingdom, which directly caused chaos in Taoism. With the full support of the Great River Kingdom, Yi Hongyu began to support the new stream. She accused Hierarch Xiong Chumo and other divine priests and deacons of the divine halls of West Hill as shameless traitors who tried to pretend to be the spokesperson of Haotian. After a short period of suppression, the new stream ushered in a period of rapid development. With the support of the Tang Empire and the Great River Kingdom, and the secret connivance of the divine halls of judgment, the new stream could be seen everywhere. Yi Su's disciples and the disciples of the sword Garrett led by Cheng Zicheng continued to travel and preach. The once weak flame gradually became bigger. More and more Taoist believers began to worship the saint called Yi Su in their homes. As for whether Yi Su was willing to do so, no one cared. The divine halls of West Hill was enraged. They issued several edicts to erase the sacredness of Yi Hongyu. However, the inheritance of the great divine priest of judgment had its own rules. The hierarch could not interfere at all. He could only continue to smear her moral character and faith. The next thing to be done was of course to purge the new stream. However, Yi Hongyu had secretly prepared a lot. Those loyal to her had already sneaked into the darkness. The bloody purge became meaningless. At this moment, everyone including the hierarch realized that it was not wise to force Yi Hongyu to betray the new stream. Taoism was thus divided. The divine halls of West Hill felt like it was in a precarious situation. Therefore, the suppression of the new stream was intensified to a frightening extent. There were dead people everywhere. Corpses of the new stream believers were nailed to wooden frames on both sides of the road. With the cawing of crows, blood became the theme of the year in the human world. However, faith was like weeds. The more you cut, the more it would burn. Next year, it would grow thicker and thicker. Taoism knew very well what kind of danger was hidden behind the blood. To solve the problem of the new stream, they had to start from the root. That was to kill Yi Hongyu, the great Tang and the great river kingdom. Thousands of cavalrymen of the divine halls and more soldiers of the South Jin kingdom were looking at the great river kingdom on the other side of the river. Zhao Nanhai was leading them. The middle-aged priest was nowhere to be found. Many people guessed that he had returned to the Jishou Abbey. The war had begun, but it had not yet entered the final stage. Many people were waiting for the result of the battle between the Golden Palace and the northern battlefront army of the Tang Empire. They were waiting for the return of the most powerful cultivators. In the suffocating atmosphere, no one noticed that a new butcher shop had opened in a small town in the South Jin Kingdom. The town was facing the north. There was no need to mention the importance of the battle between the Great Tang and the Golden Palace. But what about those who had left the human world? They left because they had discovered a possibility. The Abbey Dean had confirmed that fact. They wanted to find that person. What would they do when they found that person? Some wanted to kill her, some wanted to save her, and some had no idea what to do at all. There were different kinds of people. But since those people had not returned to the human world, it meant that they had not found her yet. Yes, even if they were the most powerful cultivators in the distanceless state, it was still difficult to find her. There was a snow-capped peak in the far north, far away from the central plains or the human world. To be more precise, it was the furthest from the human world. No matter where one went to the north, he or she would eventually reach the foot of the snow-capped peak and the frozen hot sea. This was the coldest place in the world. Breath would turn into frost, and water droplets would turn into ice. Even the hardest steel could not withstand the freezing for a long time. The buildings by the hot sea were mainly made of wood and animal skins. This used to be the home of the desolate man. After the desolate man moved south, they left behind many shabby houses, which became a paradise for cold-resistant animals, such as snow foxes and long-tailed rats. There was no such thing as early spring under the snow-capped peak. The wind and snow kept howling like before, and thick clouds covered the night sky. It was a starless night, and the bright moon could not be seen. It was extremely dark everywhere, including the snow-capped peak. In a house abandoned by the desolate man, a light was suddenly turned on, which was particularly eye-catching in the dark environment. Strangely, a dozen long-tailed rats squatted at the root of the cedar tree, gnawing on the smelly fruits, but did not dare to approach it, as if there was a creature that they were afraid of living there. The light shone through the window, illuminating the snow-covered path in front of the house. After a while, footsteps were heard, and a woman came over with a heavy bucket. The woman walked slowly with her hands on her waist. She looked a little clumsy, and spilled a lot of water as she walked. Because of the cold, the water that spilled over the edge of the bucket was instantly frozen into the shape of quicksand. Strangely, the water in the bucket was not frozen, and there was not even a thin layer of ice on the surface. It was even steaming, and the dim yellow light was dispersed. What was even more surprising was that the clothes the woman wore were also very thin. On her somewhat old green clothes, the flowers woven with exquisite embroidery had been worn out. However, she didn't seem to feel the slightest bit of cold and just walked like this. Entering the hut, the woman put the bucket in the corner, and then walked to the table by the window. She looked in a certain direction and began to stare blankly. She was a little plump, or to be precise, a little fat. Her waist was a little thick, and her movements were a little clumsy. What was puzzling was that her waist was a little too thick. The light fell on her eyebrows and eyes. She still looked very young as she had been in the past 10,000 years. Her expression was still so indifferent. Even when she looked at the snow-capped peak, she gave people a sense of condescension. She was, of course, Sang Sang. Or Haotian. The great, beautiful, plump, my heroine has finally appeared again. I'm secretly excited and clenched my fists. This feeling is so good. I'm willing to give her all my monthly tickets. Alright, I'm willing to play all the shameless things, just to make her and you happy. That's all. Chapter 1082. One day a year ago, there was a spring rain in the human world. Countless people saw the huge ship sailing towards the golden line in the divine light. She stood at the bow of the ship. Her indigo clothes were blown by the spring breeze, and the flowers gradually bloomed. Everyone thought that she had left the human world and returned to the divine kingdom. Who would have thought that she did not go back at all? She hid alone in the coldest northern land. She did not return to the divine kingdom. When she opened her eyes and saw the lush mountains, she knew that she could not go back because there was nothing but light in the divine kingdom. That was Min Mountain. She did not understand why. She used the Buddha's chessboard to live with Ning Ke for 1,000 years. She experienced the joys and sorrows of the human world and cultivated Buddhism for countless years. She finally washed away the 3 poisons in her body and got rid of the power of the human world. Why could she not go back? She stood in Min Mountain and thought silently for many days and nights. Finally, she figured out the reason. She was the choice of human beings, so her destination was the human world. This reason was not necessarily complete, but she did not know it yet. After figuring it out, she did not return to the West Hill Divine Palace. Instead, she chose to walk along the familiar hunting trails in Min Mountain and headed north. She kept walking. She passed by countless hunting villages, Helan City, Tianqi Mountains, and the ice field. Finally, she came to the cold northern land and the mountain. Her indigo clothes became thinner as she walked. The flowers on her clothes gradually faded. She knew that it was the power of time, and also because she was becoming weaker. Instead of returning to the West Hill Divine Palace, she went to the cold region of the far north, where no one had ever been. It was because she vaguely sensed some danger and wanted to go to a safe place. More importantly, she did not want anyone to see her like this. Her waist was now very thick and very bloated. She was different from her previous tall and fat appearance. She now looked very much like a pregnant woman. She was pregnant, so she did not want to be seen by humans. She was pregnant, and the child in her belly was naturally Ning Ke's. Perhaps because she was pregnant, she was gradually becoming weaker. She was going to become one of those weak ordinary humans that she used to look down on. God descended to the human world and gradually became a real human. She had experienced this process before. The headmaster had injected the power of the human world into her body and brought her to travel around the world to appreciate the beauty of the human world. Then, she was brought by Ning Ke to travel around the world and experience the world of mortals. During those days, she was gradually becoming a human. In the chessboard, she used Buddha's plan and Ning Ke's intention to cultivate again and purify her divine body. Finally, she succeeded in expelling the power of the human world in her body. She thought that she would win the battle against the headmaster, so she returned to indifference and was about to return to the divine kingdom. Unexpectedly, she was still left behind. She did not return to the divine kingdom. She thought that it was Ning Ke's trick. That trick was in her womb, a fetus. Sang Sang caressed her lower abdomen. There was no motherly radiance on her face, not even any emotion. She was just calm and a little unaccustomed. She looked at the snow-capped peak in the distance outside the window and woke up from her memories. She looked at the hot sea covered by snow not far away and thought of another memory. It was here, in the cold world covered by ice and snow, that the headmaster ate peony fish with her and him and immersed themselves in happiness in the hot spring. Then, the headmaster presided over her and Ning Ke's wedding and let them consummate their marriage. The headmaster rode the big black horse to the snow sea naked for hundreds of miles. The headmaster was so happy because he knew that she might be pregnant with Ning Ke's child and that it would be difficult for her to return to the divine kingdom. At that time, the headmaster said that Ning Ke and her consummate their marriage was so rare that it would definitely be recorded in the history books in the future. Yes, now she understood why. Sang Sang withdrew her gaze and lowered her head in silence. She was forced to stay in the human world twice by the trick of the master and his disciple. Even she did not know what to say. The methods of this pair of master and disciple were always so unexpected. They were despicable and despicable, like a spring breeze and rain. They were silent, but they were world-shaking. The wind and snow suddenly stopped. The clouds were blown away by the wind from the Black Sea on the snow-capped peak. Stars gradually appeared, and then a bright moon appeared in the sky. Sang Sang raised her head to look at the moon. Her right hand left her round belly and reached out to the night sky outside the window. She put her thumb and index finger together and exerted a little force. She wanted to crush the bright moon. She was not willing to do so. But now she could only think about it. That was what she was doing in the divine kingdom. And now she was even afraid of being discovered by the other her in the divine kingdom. Thinking of the faint uneasiness coming from the deepest part of her spiritual world, Sang Sang's face turned a little pale and she felt a little cold. She walked to the bed and picked up an animal skin to put on, especially covering her belly tightly. Then she flicked her fingers to light the firewood in the fireplace. She wanted to warm herself, which had nothing to do with the fetus in her belly. In fact, although she was getting weaker, she still did not need warmth. No matter how low the temperature was, it did not affect her. But she did it. She no longer thought and behaved according to the cold rules like before. It had nothing to do with the dark world. It was more like she was acting according to some kind of instinct. In short, she was becoming more and more like a human. Just like the oil lamp by the window, she did not need the lamp or the light. Lighting a lamp in such a dark world was meaningless except for exposing herself to danger. But she still did it because the light was really warm. Maybe it was also because the oil lamp used fish oil. There was no smoke, so it would not stain the eyes. Instead, there was a faint smell of oil. Sang Sang suddenly felt a little hungry. She looked out of the window and asked indifferently, "Why did you come back so late?" After the desolate men moved south, there was no one in the snow region. Who was she talking to? Outside the house came the sound of panting. An indigo-haired dog ran over with a frozen peony fish in its mouth. Because the hot sea was frozen, the peony fish had become extremely rare. The remaining ones were hidden in the depths of the sea. It was hard to imagine that an indigo-haired dog could go there to catch fish. Of course, if people knew that the indigo-haired dog was the famous indigo lion in the Buddha's chessboard world, it would be easy to accept. Sang Sang took the peony fish and ignored the indigo-haired dog, who stuck out its tongue and begged for food. She walked to the chopping board and cut the fish with her palm. Then she mixed the dipping sauce and began to eat. Her face was expressionless until she finished the fish. She frowned slightly because she felt that the fish was not as good as before. It had nothing to do with the fish itself or the dipping sauce. Although she used her palm, the fish she cut was definitely better than eldest brother's and Ning Kei's. Then why was it not as good as before? Or was it because of the lack of smoke? After eating the fish, she was still not satisfied and even felt hungrier. She said to the indigo-haired dog, "I want to eat meat." The indigo-haired dog widened its eyes and looked particularly innocent and pitiful. Sang Sang narrowed her eyes and looked particularly cold and ruthless. The indigo-haired dog lowered its head and walked to the vast snow sea with its tail between its legs. Sang Sang really wanted to eat meat. Although she did not need to eat, she was no longer as averse to human food as before. Most importantly, the little fellow in her belly was hungry. When she first found out that there was a fetus in her belly, she was shocked and confused, then angry and disgusted. It was not until now that she gradually learned to get used to this existence. She did not think that she had any affection for the fetus, because that was Ning Kei's trick. She was just hungry and wanted to eat meat to warm herself up. Yes, that must be it, she said to herself. After a long time, the indigo-haired dog came back dragging a freshly dead snow fox. Sang Sang was very satisfied and rewarded it with a hind leg after roasting the meat. She began to eat the roasted meat. Although it was much worse than the mutton on the grassland that the headmaster took her to eat, she still felt that it tasted good. Although she could not travel 1,000 miles in a single step to the Song Kingdom to have a water feast and then come back with the peony fish for supper, she was becoming more and more like an ordinary person. But it seemed good. Apart from her hiding by the snow sea, the most important thing to the human world was naturally the war between the Tang Empire and the Golden Tribe royal court. The Golden Tribe invaded the south and looked like they were going to war. However, due to the pressure from Taoism, the Tang Empire could only use the northern battlefront army to resist. The grassland cavalry of the Golden Tribe royal court was best at attacking like a raging fire. The Tang army was good at both attacking and defending, especially the northern battlefront general, Su Qi, who was known for his defense. He had been operating in the north of the Tang Empire for decades and had already built the border as strong as an iron bucket. If it were in the past, he would not have worried at all. But that was many years ago. Since a few years ago, the Golden Tribe royal court suddenly invaded the south and took over 7 villages, including the city of Wei and Kaiping. The Tang Empire's defense line in the north became much weaker. Especially in recent years, the Tang Empire spent a lot of money and labor to build dozens of barracks in the northwest and northwest of the Xianwan Plain. The Golden Tribe royal court showed rare patience and used tens of thousands of slaves to dismantle the barracks one by one. For the Tang army, the most critical problem was the lack of warhorses. The northern battlefront army, which used to dominate the north of the continent, could hardly move in formation now. The main force on the battlefield had become a mixed force of infantry and cavalry. It was hard for them to fight against the grassland cavalry. Especially more than 10 days ago, when the Chingu Pass was lost, the most elite cavalry of the Golden Tribe royal court could even directly threaten the North military camp. At the beginning of the war, the weakness of the Tang army was beyond many people's expectation. Apart from these objective factors, it was also a strategic choice. In the early spring, the Tang army took the initiative to retreat and lengthen the supply line of the Golden Tribe royal court. It was strategically correct. But the Tang army did not expect the Golden Tribe royal court to be so crazy. They kept marching to the south, as if they did not care about the possibility of running out of food. According to the rules, the grassland cavalry carried enough food and dried meat. If they could not break the northern battlefront army's defense line, they would never be able to return to the grassland. Such a desperate attitude was definitely not a wise military command. But now it seemed to be very effective. The grassland cavalry were like hungry wolves in a desperate situation. Their crazy momentum even overwhelmed the Tang army. Although the war was not going well, the atmosphere in the northern military camp was still normal. After all, the northern battlefront army had been dealing with the Golden Tribe royal court for a long time. They were used to the savagery of the grassland barbarians. Of course they would not be scared. Su Qi stood on Xiangliang Mountain on the side of the camp. He looked at the grassland covered by the wind and snow in silence. Snow fell on his lips. His beard that he had just cut in the morning was dyed white, which made him look funny. Several officers followed around him, but they didn't smile. Looking at the great general's slightly trembling back, it was as if they could feel the weight on his shoulders. "We can't retreat anymore." Su Qi was silent for a long time and said this. These words came out from his frozen lips without any emotion. It even gave people a feeling that he didn't expect to say these words. The officers were shocked. They didn't understand why the northern battlefront army would suddenly change their strategy. Although the vanguard was fighting hard and the morale was low, they believed that the well-trained northern battlefront army could definitely hold on for a longer time. Su Qi turned around and reached out to wipe off the snow in his beard. His hunched back straightened again and he gradually regained his power. Only now did he look like a top martial arts master of the Tang Empire. Looking at the disapproving looks on the officers' faces, he did not explain further. He looked at Hua Ying who was on standby and said, "I want you to guard Guha." Hua Ying had just risked his life to come back from the front line last night. His clothes were dirty and old, and he looked embarrassed. But his eyes were still calm. The military order was simple. There was no precondition or backup plan. The general only gave him one choice, which was to guard Guha. Hua Ying did not stay silent like the other officers. He was the one guarding Guha, and it would be his hundreds of soldiers who would die in the bloody battle. Because of the safety of the North military camp? Hua Ying asked. He was not challenging Su Qi's authority, nor was he doubting the validity of the military order. He just hoped that the general could give him a good reason to convince his subordinates, and more importantly, himself. Su Qi said indifferently, "After you leave, I will move the general's mansion out of the North military camp and close to you. If you can't guard Guha, it will be my turn." "Why?" At this moment, even the staff officers who had been suppressing their doubts couldn't help but express their objections. "Why?" "Because if we can't guard Guha, Chan Yu's men can pass through Chuanling, bypass my central camp, and enter Hebei County along the southwest side of Min Mountain. And south of Hebei County." Su Qi looked at Hua Ying and the officers and said calmly. 800 miles of plain will be the favorite battlefield of the grassland cavalry. Who can bear the responsibility if the cavalry goes straight to the center? The Tang Empire has a vast territory, but the northern battlefront army has nowhere to retreat. Because Chang An is right behind us. I like the description of the headmaster of academy, Ning Kei's methods. Su Qi's last sentence was a little early and harsh, but based on aesthetic interests, that sentence is so cool. If you want to write about war, you can't beat yourself if you don't say it at least once. Chapter 1083. I'll tell everyone on behalf of Old Master that he has something to deal with today. He's still outside, so the update will probably be delayed until late at night. Chapter 1084. Hua Ying and the other officers were silent. They knew the general was right. Even though the northern battlefront army was facing a serious situation, the Tang Empire was surrounded by enemies. The southern battlefront army and the northeast border military had their own tasks and could not come to help. Guha was just a small dot on the territory of the Tang Empire. It was more than 2,000 miles away from Chang'an. But it seemed to be the last line of defense before Chang'an. That was why Su Qi decided to defend here. He even sent the general's mansion to the north. It was quiet on the mountain. No one spoke for a long time. Snowflakes were falling slowly. The temperature and the atmosphere became much colder. Even though they knew Su Qi was right, it would cost them a lot to ask the Northern Battlefront Army to give up their original plan and defend here. Could they really defend? They knew better than the ordinary soldiers that the imperial court had done its best. Everyone in the court had worked together. The ordinary people had been living a frugal life to provide the Northern Battlefront Army with food and fodder. Even after a cold winter, they could still eat fresh pork in the barracks. Their armors were not a problem. But the terrain of Guha had been determined. If the Northern Battlefront Army wanted to stop the Golden Tribe Royal Court from advancing, they would have to face more than 100,000 cavalrymen from the grassland. That would be the last thing they wanted to face. The Northern Battlefront Army used to dominate the north of the continent. They were not afraid of entering and leaving the grassland. Even the most ordinary soldiers were good at riding and shooting. They had never been afraid of fighting in the wild. But now they had to avoid fighting in the wild. Because they had a fatal problem, they lacked horses. Hua Ying broke the silence. He walked to Su Qi and knelt down on one knee. He said calmly and firmly, "If we can't defend, we will die." Su Qi looked at his gray sideburns in his face, which had aged rapidly because of the bitter cold weather at the frontier fortress. His heart was heavy, but he did not show it on his face. He said, "You are wrong. Even if you die, you must guard it for me." Hua Ying answered without hesitation, "Yes, sir." Su Qi helped him up and looked at him in silence for a long time. Finally, he could not help but sigh, "Thank you for all these years." Hua Ying smiled and said nothing. Since the war against the Golden Tribe Royal Court began, he had been guarding the northernmost part of the Tang Empire's territory. As the vanguard, he was responsible for the most important and the heaviest task. Even though he had the only cavalry left in the Northern Battlefront Army, it was still a tough job for him. If not for his high martial arts cultivation and the tight defense of the Tang army, he would have been nearly assassinated by the experts on the grassland several times. But Hua Ying never complained. Even when Su Qi wanted to transfer him back to the North military camp for a rest, he refused very seriously. Everyone in the Northern Battlefront Army knew the reason. Even the nobles in the imperial palace and the military officials in Chang'an knew the reason. Hua Ying's surname was Hua. She was from the Hua family and Hua Shanyu. Hua Shanyue followed Li Yu in the rebellion but failed and died on the spot. Those officers who secretly rebelled against the capital from the Gushan commandery were sent to the northern military camp by Ning Ke and exchanged their military achievements for honor. After several years, few of those people were still alive. Because of this incident, the once famous Hua family quickly declined. Now only Hua Ying still held an important position in the army. Therefore, Hua Ying worked very hard. He wanted to fight for the Hua family with his life. He wanted to fight for the glory of the Hua family and be high-spirited. Su Qi said, "Don't work too hard. It's better to be alive." Hua Ying did not answer directly. He said, "We will win." It was the end of spring in the 6th year of Zhengshi of the Tang Empire and the 3455th year of Daji of West Hill. The vanguard of the Northern Battlefront Army met the cavalry of the Golden Tribe Royal Court about 170 miles south of the city of Wei. They fought for more than 10 days, with some winning and some losing. Then the main force of the Northern Battlefront Army moved north and set up camp around Guha. The two most powerful military forces in the world officially began the competition. They fought for more than 10 days, with some winning and some losing. But Guha was still behind the Northern Battlefront Army camp and the cavalry of the Golden Tribe did not move south. The two sides took a break and resumed the confrontation. But everyone knew that it was different from the past. This confrontation would not last for more than 10 days or even years. It would only last 1 or 2 days at most before the war resumed. The Northern Battlefront Army had paid a heavy price to keep the cavalry of the Golden Tribe Royal Court to the north of Guha. They were seriously short of horses. Even the most experienced soldiers who were good at archery and horsemanship could only use padeos to cover the flank of the formation. They could not fight in the front. The most powerful cavalry of the Northern Battlefront Army could only be used as infantry because they did not have warhorses. It was a waste in everyone's eyes. But who could change it? Since the day the divine halls of West Hill forced the Tang Empire to sign the peace treaty, the Xiangwan plain was ceded to them, and the warhorses were handed over as trophies. This infuriating and helpless scene was a fact. The morning sun rose from the east. Those with the best eyesight in the army and Su Qi in the general's mansion could vaguely see Min Mountain in the blood-red morning glow. Yesterday, the cavalry of the Golden Tribe Royal Court temporarily retreated to the front line of Kaiping town. They rested and reorganized for the final attack. Facing the determined Tang army and the tricky combination of infantry and cavalry, Chanyu of the Golden Tribe Royal Court could no longer be satisfied with the partial victory on the battlefield. He was even more anxious because of the passing time. Obviously, the upcoming field battle would be a storm that the Northern Battlefront Army had never faced before. Situilan stood on the meadow, holding the saber on her waist. She looked at the direction of the cavalry of the Golden Tribe Royal Court. Her dusty face was full of calmness and vigilance. Her slightly squinted eyes were shining colder than a blade. As a disciple of the academy and a descendant of the old general, she had performed well in the Northern Battlefront Army. She had long become the youngest general, and now she was Hua Ying's assistant. She was loved and respected by the soldiers of the Northern Battlefront Army. The Northern Battlefront Army had been under great pressure for dozens of days, especially in the recent days. They had paid a heavy price. Some military doctors in the camp had not slept for 3 days and nights. Situilan looked calm when she thought of this. She did not let her bodyguards notice anything wrong. But the problem was still there. It was like a heavy stone pressing on her heart. Instead of retreating, the Golden Tribe Royal Court rested and reorganized. The general's order was to defend Guha with all their might. It seemed that this field was destined to become a graveyard for hundreds of thousands of lives. But no one knew who would be qualified to write the epitaph for the dead in the end. She was in a high position in the Northern Battlefront Army. She knew a lot of military information that the ordinary soldiers did not. Yesterday, the reinforcement from the Gushan Commandery tried to sneak attack a troop of the Golden Tribe Royal Court from the foothills of Min Mountain. But they were seen through in advance. The tribe quickly moved closer to the Golden Tribe Royal Court, so the Northern Battlefront Army lost the best chance to disrupt the enemy's base. What else could they do? Situilan stared at the sand table for a long time last night. She compared the knowledge taught by the teachers from the academy and the military ministry with her own experience in the army, but she still could not find a solution. General Su Qi was the only one who could decide the strategy of the Northern Battlefront Army. Or further south, the siblings in the Imperial Palace and the teachers from the academy. But she also wanted to help. Unfortunately, Situilan had many questions in her heart besides the heavy stone. General Su Qi's strategy could not be said to be wrong. Whether it was the retreat at the beginning or the bloody defense at the moment, the former was to trade space for time and exhaust the enemy's army. The latter was because they could not show any signs of defeat and had to use absolute iron and blood to stabilize the Tang Empire's northern border. However, it was obvious that there should be many better, or more flexible, or less desperate ways to deal with the situation. General Su Qi's strategy was to attract all the main forces of the Golden Tribe Royal Court to Guha. If they could win, it would be difficult for the main cavalry of the Golden Tribe Royal Court to escape. In the hundreds of years of war between the Tang Empire and the Golden Tribe Royal Court, the most troublesome thing about the Golden Tribe Royal Court was that they could escape. Even if the Tang army won, the cavalry of the Golden Tribe Royal Court could quickly retreat to the depths of the grassland, and the Tang army could not destroy their main force. There was a lot of military wisdom in this strategy, but it had to be carried out. Most importantly, the Tang army had to win first, so they could talk about how to destroy the main force of the Golden Tribe Royal Court. How to win this war? Situilan could not figure it out. She did not think General Su Chi could. So she was more and more confused about what the general or the imperial court was thinking. She was neither a pessimist nor a defeatist. Just like her bodyguards and the Tang soldiers in the camp, she was not afraid of the cavalry of the Golden Tribe Royal Court. But her reason told her that victory was still far away. The Northern Battlefront Army was of high quality, and they were backed by Guha, so they had the advantage. Not to mention the right time and the right people, they should not make her so desperate. But there was still the same problem: no horses. No war horses. The Northern Battlefront Army did not have enough war horses. Situilan walked back to the camp with her bodyguards. Along the way, the soldiers stood up and saluted her. She could clearly tell that although they saluted in the same way, there was a big difference. For example, the new soldiers who had been in the Northern Battlefront Army for less than 2 years looked calmer and a little shy. But the old veterans looked indifferent. As for the look in their eyes, they were sneakily glancing at her. Although it was just a small movement, she could clearly feel it. Those veterans reminded her of someone she had not seen for a long time. It was her former classmate and later the so-called teacher, the guy who had stood on the top of the world. Chapter 1085. That guy also looked tired. He used to peek at her like this, whether it was in the wetland of the academy, in the House of Red Sleeves, or in the north of Yen Kingdom. He always glanced at her chest, waist, buttocks, and legs. He thought she didn't know, but she knew everything. She was just too shy to say it. Of course, Situilan thought of Ning Quebec. She didn't suddenly recall her youth when she was in a desperate situation. She just wanted to gain some strength from it. The veterans in the camp were very similar to Ning Quebec. They were all unimaginably tough and could do things that most people couldn't imagine. But what made her sad was that deep in the indifferent expressions of those old soldiers, there was still unwillingness. Especially when they saw the warhorses led by her bodyguards, the envy and unhappiness in their eyes could be clearly seen. Yes, it was still the same question. Situilan lowered her head and thought about why the imperial court agreed to cede Xiangwan Plain to the Golden Tribe Royal Court when they negotiated with the West Hill Divine Palace. Why did they agree to compensate the Golden Tribe and the Yen Kingdom with warhorses? Yes, the situation was really serious at that time. But didn't the imperial court know that if they agreed to the conditions, they would be committing suicide? That black noose had been falling slowly in the air for several years. Now it finally fell on the grassland, in front of every soldier of the Northern Battlefront Army. Even the people of Chang'an knew it, so did the ministers in the imperial court. Princely Peiyan even hanged himself because of it. Situilan knew it was the Academy's decision. More precisely, it was Ning Kei's decision. Why did the Academy agree? Situilan walked to the tent and looked at the man and the woman by the table. She felt a bit weird. She was a student of the Academy, and these two could really represent the Academy. Thinking of her previous dissatisfaction, she didn't know what to say. Mu Yu's favorite light yellow dress had long been replaced by practical cotton-padded clothes. Sixth brother was still naked from the waist up like he did at the back of the mountain of the Academy, wearing only a leather jacket. Situilan could not say anything bad to the two Academy teachers, because these days, they were supposed to be sitting on the clouds like immortals, but they were living and fighting like ordinary soldiers. The situation of the war had changed. Cultivators had been assassinating the enemy's generals all the time. If Mu Yu had not organized the array tactical masters to set up several exquisite arrays in the camp, and if Mr. Six had not waved his hammer, many Tang generals would have been assassinated by the Golden Tribe royal court at all costs. As for Mr. Six's sleepless nights repairing the weapons of the Tang army, it was not worth mentioning. Situilan found that one person was missing and asked, "Where did Mr. Fourth go?" Mr. Fourth of the academy, Fan Yu, was now the brains of the vanguard of the northern battlefront army. General Hua Ying trusted him very much. He was the one who planned everything. Mu Yu took out a towel from the basin and wrung it dry. Then she walked to her and wiped the dust off her face. She said with pity, "I don't care where he went. You are such a beautiful girl. Even if you can't dress up, you should at least make yourself clean." Situilan was not in the mood to care about her own appearance. She smiled bitterly. When she thought of the battle array of the Golden Tribe royal court on the meadow, she became serious again. She asked Mu Yu in a low voice, "When will Mr. Third take action? When will the Enlightenment Doctrine and the Desolate Man arrive?" The current situation was extremely favorable to the northern battlefront army. She could not think of any change. However, General Su Chi was still calm. She naturally thought that the academy must have arranged many powerful fighters. Mu Yu had been setting up arrays for many days and nights. She looked exhausted. Hearing Situilan's words, she said after a moment of silence, "I don't know where senior sister is either." Hearing this, Situilan was disappointed and confused. According to the original plan, she should have conquered the eastern wilderness in early spring and come here. She should have taken action. Maybe it is not the right time yet. There must be a reason. Mu Yu put her arms around her and sat down. She asked her to finish her breakfast and comforted her. Everything that went against common sense must have its own reasons. For the army, common sense was the objective judgment of victory and the subsequent calm response. Hua Ying stood outside the tent. He looked at the bloody morning glow and the countless tents of the Golden Tribe royal court in the distance. He always felt that the general's response was unreasonable. What was the reason? A staff officer handed him a pair of binoculars. He took the binoculars and looked in the direction of the Golden Tribe royal court. Then he looked to the east, dozens of miles away. He observed in silence for a long time. The binoculars were made by the academy and brought to the front line by Mr. Sixth. Now almost all the important generals in the northern battlefront army had one. Once they used it, they would treat it like a treasure and would never let it go. Hua Ying sighed. With the help of the academy, he could clearly see the movements of the Golden Tribe royal court. But the enemy did not notice it at all. If it were in the past, the northern battlefront army would definitely win the war. Especially now, Chan Yu had taken the risk and led his entire tribe to attack the south. He wanted to fight a war that could destroy the country. He did not care about the retreat at all. His troop formation was unparalleled. But in the eyes of the experienced Tang generals, it was also full of loopholes. As long as they could send out a strong cavalry, they could definitely make the enemy suffer. Give me 10,000, no, even 8,000. Hua Ying put down the binoculars and looked to the north. He said in a trembling voice, "Give me 8,000 good horses, and I can defend Guha. I can even drive them to the north of the city of Wei." Chan Yu's choice was too confident. In Hua Ying's eyes, it was a great opportunity. That was why his voice was trembling. It was an unbearable pain to lose such an opportunity. Su Chi firmly believed that the northern battlefront army could defeat the cavalry of the Golden Tribe royal court in the field. Hua Ying was confused. He would not question the military order, but he painfully wished that he could have 10,000 more horses. But that would not happen. Even if Haotian came back to the human world, there was no way he could make 10,000 well-trained horses for the Tang in such a short period of time. The Golden Tribe royal court dared to attack the south. Chanyu was so confident and even arrogant in his troop formation. He was not afraid of the final battle in the field tomorrow. Wasn't it because he knew that the Tang had no horses? Many soldiers of the Tang army imagined that the imperial court had secretly raised a lot of horses to give the enemy the heaviest and most unexpected blow in the final battle. But that was just a fantasy. Chanyu would not think so. Raising horses required a lot of fodder, stables, manpower, and resources. It was impossible for such a large number of war horses to be secretly raised in the provinces of the Tang Empire. How could they hide from the omnipresent eyes of Taoism? Even if they could, what was the use of those untrained horses that had never been on the battlefield? Horses that had been on the battlefield for a long time. Situilan was thinking, the cavalrymen were thinking, Huayin was thinking, and everyone was thinking. They were all desperately and angrily screaming in their hearts. Why did they not have horses? They did not need war horses that had been on the battlefield for a long time. Even an ordinary horse would do. As long as it could move the cavalrymen, it did not matter if it was a handsome stallion, a graceful mare, a naughty colt, a hatao horse, a river pony, or a grassland horse. Any horse would do. As long as it was a horse. Because without horses, the Tang Empire would not survive. In the northern battlefront army, only General Su Qi still had the last bit of confidence. Yu Lian did not show up in the grassland. The national master and the dozen high priests of the Golden Tribe royal court did not come to the front. They were in the rear, heavily protected by the grassland cavalrymen. Su Qi's confidence did not come from Yu Lian or the world wayfarer of the Devil's Doctrine, Tang. He had already received information from Helan City that the desolate man's tribe in the eastern wilderness was pinned down by the cavalrymen of the divine halls from the Yen kingdom. They could not come to help in a short time. This was, of course, very bad news. Fortunately, he received another piece of news from the academy dozens of days ago, which brought him the long-awaited spring breeze. Countless wagons had already left the town where the northern military camp was located. They were transported to the back of Guha and hidden in the supply camp of the main force of the northern battlefront army. To keep it a secret, even Huayin did not know about it. The dawn had not come yet, and the moon had already fallen asleep. The sky was turning white in the east, and there were still some dim stars in the west. The people on the grassland had already woken up. In the countless tents of the Golden Tribe royal court, children's laughter and women's worried whispers could be heard everywhere. Of course, most of the noise was the sound of scimitars and leather armors, the restless neighing of war horses, and the crackling of hay. According to the tradition of the grassland cavalrymen, no one dared to bring their families with them. But this time, the Golden Tribe royal court was invading the south, and all the men brought their wives, children, and slaves. Chanyu and the nobles were glad that they had made a lot of preparations in advance, so they did not become a burden to the warriors, but became the best motivation for them to fight the Tangs bravely. The warriors of the Golden Tribe had already lined up. They looked solemn and determined. The cavalrymen of different tribes were also putting on their leather armors and preparing their weapons with the help of their slaves or family members. It was the darkest time before dawn, but the cavalrymen of the Golden Tribe did not want to take advantage of the darkness to attack the Tang army in the south, because the darkness was unfair to everyone. The cavalrymen were too fast, so they needed a good vision. Now that the Golden Tribe had the absolute advantage, they would not take such a risk. The reason why they started to line up so early was because of the need of the war, and also because of the fighting experience imprinted in the blood of all the grassland cavalrymen. Today would be a long and arduous battle. Humans could persevere with their spiritual will, but the warhorses could not. Therefore, before entering the battlefield, they had to feed the warhorses well, with the best fodder and even some expensive grains and beans, with enough water and salt. All of these preparations had to be completed 4 hours before the battle officially began. 4 hours later, the cavalry of the Golden Tribe would sweep over and devour everything in sight. There are some problems with the schedule these 2 days, so it is very likely that the update will not be completed tomorrow. If not, I will report to you, and everything will be back to normal the day after tomorrow. Chapter 1086. Chanyu walked out of the golden tent and looked around. A satisfied smile appeared on his dark and handsome face. He was satisfied with the calmness of his subordinates, and even more satisfied with what he had built for so many days and years. In his opinion, the northern battlefront army, which was seriously short of cavalrymen, was no match for the cavalrymen of the Golden Tribe. The battle between the two sides had been in a stalemate a few days ago. On the one hand, the northern battlefront army was unexpectedly tough. On the other hand, the Tang armaments and cultivators were beyond imagination. On the other hand, the cavalrymen of the Golden Tribe did not go all out. In a battle between infantry and cavalry, no matter who had the innate advantage, the cavalry was psychologically superior. If infantry wanted to resist the cavalry, they would have to pay more in physical and mental strength. A few days ago, the cavalry of the Golden Tribe was exhausting the Tang infantry's physical and mental strength. More importantly, they were gradually wearing down the enemy's will and courage. At the same time, they were boosting their morale and confidence of winning. Today was the day of the final battle. The cavalry of the Golden Tribe would attack with all their strength. They would attack without reserve. They would attack without leaving any survivors. They would return the humiliation they had suffered for hundreds of years to the Tangs. They would completely defeat the main force of the northern battlefront army. It was a risky strategy. But in Chanyu's eyes, it was a sure-win strategy. After testing the enemy a few days ago, he was sure that the Tangs did not have any hidden tricks. So, he would crush them head-on. Dawn was coming. The white light from the east covered 1/10 of the sky. The warm morning light fell on the grassland and on Chanyu's face, making his cheeks look stronger. He looked at the grassland in the south and the Tang camp in the distance. He seemed to see the cavalry of the Golden Tribe surging like a tide and the ground of the grassland starting to shake. Then, just like a few days ago, the Tang camp would launch all kinds of armaments. The catapults would make a dull sound. The spears in front of the camp fences would be sharp. The iron thorns in the trenches would be cold. The swords of the cultivators from the central plains would shine. The chi of heaven and earth would change violently. However, those would be drowned by his cavalry. General Buell walked over. He looked at the wisest Chanyu in the history of the grassland and the man he admired the most. He said in a trembling voice, "From today on, you will be the king of the world." The chief no longer smiled, remaining calm as usual. It was because he was certain that he could remain this calm. He looked past the Tang camp in the south and at a location further south. According to the imperial advisor, that was Chang'an. That gentle but fearsome emperor had died 6 years ago, but his daughter was still alive. Chanyu thought to himself that he would kill her after conquering Chang'an and then stab his penis into her body. Ada also appeared outside the golden tent. He did not take a bath last night and the blood stains on his body had already coagulated, giving off a faint stench which attracted the mosquitoes and flies in the weeds. The nobles looked at the former slave, who was now the most powerful warrior of the Golden Tribe. Their eyes were full of hatred and fear, and they did not want to stand too close to him. Ada was injured on the battlefield a few days ago. In order to remember this injury, he purposely did not wash off the blood on his body. It was not because he wanted to remember the humiliation, but because he wanted to remember that he should learn from the opponent. That day, he hid among the cavalry of the Golden Tribe and broke through the trenches and spear fences of the Tang army. Then he hid in the dead bodies of his companions and tried to assassinate Huaying, the vanguard general of the northern battlefront army. Ada had always wanted to kill Huaying. At first, he only wanted to take revenge on Ning Ke for the bloody captive slaughter in Chang'an. But later, he was not reconciled to the fact that he failed to kill Huaying. The unreconciled feeling was like a poisonous snake that made him take the risk to assassinate Huaying. His assassination failed because from the very beginning, or more precisely, from the moment he hid among the cavalry and rushed to the front of the Tang camp, his whereabouts and purpose had been clearly predicted by someone. Huaying did not show up. What came was an iron hammer and a tactical array. Ada was ambushed and was immediately injured. But he was after all one of the most powerful cultivators in the Golden Tribe royal court. He finally broke through the encirclement of the Tang army and escaped back to the Golden Tribe, but he was extremely embarrassed. Regardless of his injury, he visited the nation master late at night and learned who those people were. The one who saw through his plan was Fan Yu, the fourth of the academy. The warrior who waved the iron hammer was Mr. 6 of the academy. And the woman who used the tactical array as if it was alive was Mr. 7 of the academy. The three masters of the academy were all at the peak of the see-through state. In the world of cultivation, they were certainly great figures. But for a truly powerful cultivator like Ada, he could easily defeat 10 of them at once. But he still failed miserably, which he could not understand. After thinking for a whole night, Ada did not become angrier or dizzy with anger. Instead, he became much calmer. This was the first time he fought with the academy on the battlefield and he learned a lot. He respected the academy a lot more and was more determined to destroy the academy. That was why he was so calm when he looked at the Tang camp under the morning light. Even though he was hated and feared by those nobles, he was still calm. The Golden Tribe would definitely win today and he did not need to do anything. They also believed that the Golden Tribe would win, so Chanyu and Ada were calm. But more men from the grassland were fanatical. They looked at the Tang army in the south with cold eyes like wolves. As long as they defeated the Tang Empire, the Golden Tribe royal court would be the overlord of the world. In the New World, they would occupy the most prosperous town in the Central Plains, where the smoothest silk, have the most beautiful women, drink the strongest wine, drink the clearest stream, and eat the softest bread. These were all gifts from the everlasting heaven. If they did not accept them, they would be punished by heaven. Chanyu, Ada, and countless cavalrymen of the Golden Tribe were looking at the Tang camp in the south. In the Tang camp, General Huaying and his subordinates were also looking at the north. In the temporary general's mansion, Su Qi was also looking at the north. He was looking at the hungry wolves in the morning light and the morning wind. People sensed the danger. The war in the previous 10 days had been extremely fierce. The cavalrymen of the Golden Tribe did try their best, but the northern battlefront army's defense was extremely tough. That was why they were evenly matched. But today was different. It was obvious that the Golden Tribe was going all out today. Chanyu and his subjects were ready to bet the fate of the entire tribe on the battle that was about to begin. Hua Ying's face turned pale. With the help of the telescope, he could see everything happening in the Golden Tribe royal court. He saw the grassland barbarians feeding the horses with food, water, and salt. He even saw the lamb bones in the pot. As an experienced general of the Tang army, he knew the habits of the grassland cavalrymen. In 2 hours at most, the well-fed warhorses would lead the wolf-like barbarians to him. That was the most regular rule of fighting for the grassland cavalrymen. That was also why he was so angry. Chanyu and his grassland cavalrymen were not afraid to let the Tang army see what they were doing. That meant they had already set the time of the battle and informed the Tang army. What kind of confidence was that? And what kind of humiliation was that for the Tang army? If it were 10 years ago, Huaying would have sent his cavalrymen to attack as soon as he saw the first scene. He would have been able to win the battle when the enemy was unprepared. But he could not do that now. He did not have enough cavalrymen, nor could he prepare the warhorses in batches like the northern battlefront army did when they were in their prime, if. That sentence and that judgment came to Hua Ying's mind again. If the Great Tang still had a true cavalry force and a sufficient number of warhorses, would the chief still dare to advance so recklessly? No, what awaited the Golden Tribe royal court today was destruction. If there were really if, how could there be so many ifs in the world? There were never ifs. That was why the Golden Tribe royal court would not be destroyed today. That was why Chanyu and his grassland cavalrymen dared to attack so recklessly. That was why the northern battlefront army would face such an ending. He could even see the bleak color on the word ending and smell the despair in it. Different from General Huaying, the ordinary soldiers of the northern battlefront army were still calm and determined. They did not know the secret military intelligence or the result of the sand table. They did not know or even did not care about the odds of winning the battle. They only knew to fight, and they were as fearless as they were in the past. Looking at the Tang army who were silently preparing for the battle, Situelan slightly closed her eyes to hide the gloominess. Then she quickly raised her head and cheered herself up. She did not want to affect the morale of the army. She suddenly noticed a Tang soldier near the stove. At this time, all the Tang soldiers had finished their breakfast quickly and started to sharpen their weapons. Only that Tang soldier was still standing beside the pot, holding a big bowl in his left hand and a wooden spoon in his right hand. He was eating the vegetable porridge in big mouthfuls, and after eating the meat, he was even more happy to say something. "What's your name?" Situelan walked to the stove and said while looking at the Tang soldier. The Tang soldier was not old, but from the calluses on his fingers that held the porridge bowl and the indifferent expression on his face, it could be seen that he was a veteran who had been through hundreds of battles. The soldier looked at her and was stunned. He put the bowl on the stove and saluted. He reported, "I'm Wang Wu, the commander of the 4th Scout Team of the Vanguard Battalion." "Nice to meet you, General." "Wang Wu. That's a neat name." Situelan said, "But you are not neat enough. Didn't you see that the others have already returned to the camp to prepare for the battle? Why are you still here?" Wang Wu showed respect to her, but it did not mean he was afraid. He explained in a sincere and funny way, "The scouts don't have to go to the battle for now. Besides, it will take at least 2 hours for the barbarians to arrive. Why are you in such a hurry? There is so much meat in the porridge today. It would be a pity if we don't finish it." Situelan slightly raised her eyebrows and said, "You are indeed a veteran." Wang Wu scratched his neck with the end of the wooden spoon and said with a smile, "You flatter me." Situelan said, "You have such a good appetite so early in the morning. It seems that you are very confident about today's battle. If everyone can be like you, or," she stopped abruptly when she said the word, "or." The lazy smile on Wang Wu's face suddenly disappeared. He looked at her calmly and even coldly and said, "General, or what? Or a miracle?" "You know, there is no miracle." Situelan stared at his eyes coldly. After a moment of silence, she said, "What do you want to say?" "There is a lot of meat in the porridge today, and even more vegetables. Although the food in the northern battlefront army has always been excellent, it is still too good to be true. It makes me suspicious." Wang Wu was not afraid of her eyes at all. He calmly said, "Or, this is the last meal before we die, so General wants us to have a good meal." Situelan said coldly, "What do you want to say?" Wang Wu pointed at the Tang soldiers who were silently preparing for the battle in the tent not far away and said, "I know that we will definitely lose today's battle. In fact, many people know it, but they just don't say it." Situelan was silent for a long time. Wang Wu said, "If you think I have shaken the morale of the army, you can kill me on the spot." Situelan said, "What I want to know is why you are telling me this." Wang Wu said, "Because I want to tell General Su, the Imperial Court, and the Academy. I am not reconciled. I don't want to lose. I don't understand why the northern battlefront army would end up like this." Situelan said in a low voice, "It is the mission of the Tang soldiers to guard the border for the country. Why are you not reconciled?" The question is, why did General Su send us out of Guha? Why do we have to fight here? I am not afraid of death, but I don't want to be sent to die. Wang Wu suddenly became angry. He threw the wooden spoon into the porridge pot and shouted at Situelan. The Xiangwan plain was ceded by the imperial court. The battlefield was chosen by the general's mansion. Why do you want us to die? Why do you want us to die? You generals, even if you want us to die, can't you win? Situelan reached out her hand to stop her soldiers from drawing out their swords. She was silent for a long time because she did not know how to answer the old soldier's angry question. Yes, the imperial court wanted the Tang army to keep the enemy out of the border. They would do it even if they had to sacrifice their lives. But the imperial court should at least let them win. Otherwise, how could they die in peace? Then what do you want us to do? What do you want us to do? She looked at Wang Wu and asked in a serious tone. Wang Wu did not expect to hear such an answer. He was silent for a long time and smiled gloomily. He did not say anything and turned back to his camp. Situelan looked at his back and did not continue to ask. She had guessed what the young soldier wanted. It was what she wanted too. It was what the entire northern battlefront army and even the Tang Empire wanted. Wang Wu walked back to his tent and stared at the half-bag of hay outside for a long time. He was a scout, one of the few soldiers in the northern battlefront army who had horses. But 2 years ago, his horse died outside the city of Wei. Since then, he had never had a chance to have his own mount. A scout without a mount was worse than a dog. Wang Wu often thought so. In the past 2 years, he felt that his life was worse than a dog's. If a dog could still bark, what could he do? Wang Wu kicked away the hay and was about to wash his face. When he saw the pale face in the bucket, he frowned and suddenly began to hate his current mood. He took a deep breath and suppressed the despair and anger in his heart. He drew out the broadsword he brought from the city of Wei and ordered his subordinates to prepare for the battle. A scout without a mount was still a Tang soldier. Even if it was a hopeless battle, he had to fight to the end. He looked at the Golden Tribe camp in the north and suddenly thought of the city of Wei. When the city of Wei was massacred by the Golden Tribe cavalry, only a few people escaped, and he was one of them. After returning to the northern battlefront army, he got a mount again after his identity was verified. Then he lost it again, just like he used to have the city of Wei, but in the end, he lost everything. Wang Wu often missed the days when he went hunting with General Ma on the grassland. He missed the days when he followed his seniors to the Shubi Lake to kill the horse gangs and rob gold and silver. Those days were gone forever. Under his indifferent and tired look, there was anger and hatred that had never been extinguished. He always thought about defeating the barbarians on the grassland with the northern battlefront army and taking back the city of Wei. But it was difficult. And looking at the situation today, it seemed that that day would never come. He wanted a warhorse, a handsome one. He wanted to ride it and fight against the enemy. If he had a warhorse and his comrades all had warhorses, then his dream would come true. This obsession kept tormenting him. Looking at the horses in the Golden Tribe royal court, he almost went crazy. At this moment, as long as someone could give him a horse, he would give up all his wealth and even his life. He would even wash the feet of those stinky grassland barbarians and kill them later. If someone could give him a horse, he would do anything for that person. Unfortunately, there was no if. Wang Wu lowered his head and was about to wash his face. The bloodiest battle in 1,000 years would be coming. It would consist of countless battles, and countless people would die. The northern battlefront army might lose, and all the Tang soldiers would die for the country. He did not want to die with dirt on his face and vegetables in his mouth. The next moment, he suddenly felt dizzy because the water in the basin was shaking. His eyebrows and eyes looked strange in the water. They were not as gloomy as before, but rather funny. The people of the Golden Tribe royal court who were dozens of miles away also felt the shaking. More than 100,000 grassland cavalries were preparing for the battle and feeding their horses water. Suddenly, they found that those brave but tame warhorses suddenly became restless. Some of them kept shaking their heads and refused to drink water or eat fodder. Some of them looked somewhere in fear and kicked their front hooves anxiously, as if that was the only way to convince themselves that the shaking was not real, but not something they were most afraid of. The entire field started shaking. From the city of Wei in the north to the meadow outside Guha, the wheels of the wagons in the camps of both sides were squeaking. Some soldiers who were not paying attention even lost their balance because of the shaking. Ade jumped onto the roof of a big car and squinted his eyes to look at the place where the tremor came from. His eyesight was very good and he should be the first one to see the movement over there. Therefore, he was also the first one to be shocked speechless. That childish but proud and cold face was full of disbelief. Following that, more and more people saw the cause of the tremor. Wu Wu's eyebrows suddenly rose high, and the corners of his lips curled up high. His hands began to tremble, and the wet towel fell into the basin, splashing water everywhere. Just like him, the scouts inside and outside the camp and the soldiers of the Northern Battlefront Army in the distance all felt the vibration. They looked to the northwest. The camp became dead silent. Everyone was shocked and confused, but more than that, they were excited and expectant. The field under the morning sun was very clear. There was no wind, no dust, and the sight was very clear. On the horizon in the northwest, a large dark cloud was moving slowly. The reason why it was moving slowly was not because the dark cloud was moving too slowly, but because the area covered by the dark cloud was so wide that it gave people an illusion. The dark cloud quickly flew for more than 10 miles and came to the edge of the field near Guha. Everyone could see clearly that it was not a dark cloud, but a large area of dense smoke and dust. The smoke and dust were the dust caused by the hooves of the horses. Countless wild horses were sweeping towards them. The morning sun reflected the sky red. The warm light entered the smoke and dust, as if the morning glow was plucked from the sky to the ground. The galloping horses seemed to be burning. It was extremely beautiful and dazzling. No one could count how many wild horses were hiding in the morning glow. No one could figure out how many wild horses could cause such an earth-shattering scene. People only knew that an unimaginable number of wild horses had suddenly appeared in the world. That was because they did not understand that for the Tang people, their arrival was a real miracle. For the past 10 days, the past year, the past 3 years, the Tang Empire, from the emperor to the ministers, from the common people to the blood-soaked soldiers, had been praying for a sufficient number of warhorses. But they knew that it was an extravagant hope, because the Xiangwan plain was gone, and Taoism would not give the Tang Empire a chance. Seeing that the war that would determine the fate of the entire world was about to begin, people like General Huaing, Situelan, and Wang Wu could not help but murmur. They were even willing to sacrifice their lives and dignity to pray for the Tang Empire, who no longer believed in Haotian, to give the Tang Empire a chance. The Tang Empire needed horses, war horses. Haotian seemed to have heard the voices of all the Tang people, as if she had forgotten about their betrayal. She stood in the morning glow and said 3 words to the quagmire in the depths of the wilderness. We must have horses. So the Tang Empire had horses. The Tang army instantly entered a state of ecstasy. In sharp contrast, the dozens of tribes of the Golden Tribe royal court were still silent, and all the grassland people looked extremely pale. The Golden Tribe royal court dared to invade the south and start a war with the Tang Empire, and all the tribes followed Chanyu without hesitation. It was all based on one fact: the Tang army was short of horses. However, just before the war, countless wild horses came from the depths of the grassland. What was going on? Where did these wild horses come from? Why did the tribes live in the grassland all year round without knowing about the existence of these wild horses? Which grassland could support so many wild horses? Some elders of the tribes and a few brave travelers remembered a rumor from decades ago. It was said that in the depths of the West Wilderness, in the swamp where even the wolves did not dare to enter, lived a group of Pegasus who could walk on water and eat clouds. Those Pegasus were the mounts of the Tingri heaven, but they lived in the human world. Could it be that the black mass of wild horses in the south was the legendary Pegasus? If they were the mounts of the Tingri heaven, why would they go to the Tang army? The elders were pale as if they were about to faint. The travelers were trembling, and the warriors of the tribes almost dropped their machetes. The women began to chant in a frightened tone, hoping to get the protection of the Tingri heaven. Looking at the overwhelming wild horses in the south, the grassland people suddenly felt that they had been abandoned by the Tingri heaven. No one understood why this happened. In the carriage behind them, the national master of the Golden Tribe did not understand either. But he knew that everything had changed. He sighed deeply. Several priests had been ordered to go to the Golden Tribe. He and the rest of the high priests formed a carriage array. He did not show up on the battlefield because he was afraid of Yu Lian and the Tang Empire. He had been persuading Chan Yu not to act so rashly because he felt that the academy and the Tang Empire would not be so simple. Unfortunately, he failed to persuade them. The outcome of today's war seemed to have been decided. But some people did not think so. Looking at the dusty Tang army in the south, Chan Yu's handsome face was still cold. As the overlord of the grassland, he pushed the Golden Tribe royal court to invade the south with great courage. He took the risk of being surrounded by the Tang army and fought this war head-on because he believed that he could win in the end. He wanted to avenge his brother. Most importantly, he wanted to rule the entire human world. He wanted his subordinates to become the nobles of every country in the Central Plains. He wanted his descendants to occupy the beautiful mountains and rivers in the south forever. Therefore, he had to win. This was what the Abbey Dean promised him, and he promised the Abbey Dean. Even now, even though he saw countless wild horses galloping over, he still did not lose confidence. To be more precise, other than his expression becoming a little ugly, his will was not affected in the slightest. General Lebu murmured, according to the news from Hautian Taoism, the Tingri heaven disappeared and the Central Plains people are looking for her. Could it be that we disobeyed her will and sent these horses to help the Tang? Chan Yu's eyes flashed with coldness. He stared at him and said coldly, "Stupid thing." Lebu did not dare to argue and left in silence. He thought he knew what Chan Yu was thinking. The upcoming field battle on the Guha grassland would be a decisive one. The Golden Tribe could not afford to lose, nor could they afford to retreat. Because the cavalry of the Golden Tribe had gone too far to the south and it was too far for them to return home. Since they could not admit defeat or retreat, they could only fight on. How could they waver the morale of the army at this moment? Lebu understood the reason, so he kept silent when he was scolded as stupid. This has nothing to do with morale. The Tang will never win. Why? What do the Tangs want, even if they shed blood and kowtow? Horses. Wrong. Chan Yu looked at the south with a cold and confident expression. What the Tangs want are not horses, but war horses. Yes. Although Situelan and Wang Wu thought every day that any kind of horse would be good as long as there were horses, in fact, only war horses were needed for the cavalry. War horses had to be trained for a long time. But now there was only a herd of wild horses on the grassland. Wild horses had never seen blood, never been to the battlefield, no saddle, no bridle. How could they ride them? How could they fight? No one could train tens of thousands of wild horses into war horses in such a short period of time. The morning had just arrived, and they were about to go to the battlefield. What else could those wild horses do except to watch? Hearing Chan Yu's words, General Lebu's face suddenly brightened. He was the general in charge of the cavalry of the royal palace. The reason why he did not think of this was that he was stunned by the scene of tens of thousands of horses galloping. The Golden Tribe royal court began to speed up the preparation for the charge. The warhorses, which had been frightened by the wild horses, calmed down a little under the comfort of their masters. They began to put on their leather armors and quiver. However, when they looked at their companions in the south, they still looked a little uneasy and disorderly. But just as Chan Yu's cold and correct judgment, the Tang camp in the south was even more chaotic. The Tang army finally woke up from the ecstasy and tears. Hearing the news from the scouts in the distance, they started to prepare for the battle as fast as they could. But they found that the vanguard camp of the Northern Battlefront Army did not have enough riding equipment. It had been 3 years without mounts. None of the soldiers in the Northern Battlefront Army had thought of this problem beforehand. More troublesome things were yet to come. The Tang army found that although the wild horses were relatively friendly to them, they were extremely resistant to being reined in, let alone riding equipment. The Tang camp was full of wild horses galloping everywhere. Their mottled hair was flying everywhere. Some wild horses even knocked over the Tang army and ran away. Although they could not see what was going on in the Tang camp, they could hear the sounds of chaos and see the smoke and dust that represented chaos. The grassland cavalrymen, who already knew Chan Yu's wise judgment, whistled mockingly in the direction of the Tang camp and waved their machetes to show their contempt. Right at this moment, an extremely unpleasant howl resounded in the world. The sound was like 2 rough stones rubbing against each other, but it also sounded like a broken wind box, giving off a feeling of exhaustion. It also sounded like a patient gasping for breath, but it did not stop at all. The unpleasant neigh pierced through the sky and earth. The mockery of more than 100,000 grassland cavalrymen of the Golden Tribe royal court was forcibly suppressed. The indignant neigh and strange snorting noises of the wild horses in the Tang camp suddenly disappeared. Tens of thousands of wild horses seemed to have heard the most terrifying sound. They did not dare to move anymore. They all looked at the place where the neigh came from and raised their necks high, like soldiers waiting to be inspected. The dust in the northwest of the wilderness was about to completely settle down. Something seemed to be coming out from inside. There were 8 divine horses, rarely seen in the mortal world, and they were dragging a shabby carriage. A black donkey sat in the shabby chariot. Much of the donkey's fur had been peeled off, and it looked rather pitiful. However, its expression was one of contentment. Perhaps it was because it was born with a heroic spirit, or perhaps it was because it was eating grapes and drinking wine. The black donkey looked down at all the horses in the wilderness, wild horses and war horses, like a real king. The wild horses in the Tang camp lowered their heads. The war horses of the Golden Tribe royal court were frightened. Mu Yu and the 6th brother walked out of the camp and toward the broken chariot. At this time, they saw the big black horse dragging the black chariot behind the broken chariot. It looked happy and fat. It seemed that it had been living well with its elders for the past 3 years. Mu Yu smiled. Because the grassland was too dry, her lips cracked and some blood flowed out. She and the 6th brother saluted the black donkey in the chariot. The black donkey nodded reservedly and returned the salutation. The big black horse rushed to Mu Yu and lowered its head to snuggle in her arms. But it suddenly remembered the guy who only had one arm and forced itself to move away. Mu Yu touched its neck. The big black horse stepped back and bowed to her and the 6th brother. Then, the sound of wheels came from the Tang camp. Countless carriages came out of the supply camp and came to the vanguard camp. The carriages were filled with all kinds of riding equipment and sabers. The 4th brother, Fan Yu, was walking in the front. The disciples of the academy finally met in the wilderness. The saddle is on the horse's back, the reins are tightened, and the wild horse is calm. The cavalrymen of the Northern Battlefront Army gently touched the mounts that they used to be familiar with. They sighed with emotion. Their mounts were getting old and left. Only these mounts were still the same. Although they were a bit old, they were still good. Holding the water, Wang Wu moved closer to his mount and fed it. Looking at this wild horse that was still a little restless, he silently thought in his heart, I will really be your slave for the rest of my life. Now, let's go kill the enemies. Yes, let's go kill the enemies. The cavalrymen of the Golden Tribe Royal Court took the lead and attacked like a tide. The restless grassland warhorses, under the whipping of their masters and the pain of the spurs, burst out with courage and bravery. They forgot their instinctive fear and started to charge. The Tang army was much quieter than before. They did not get on their horses. They led the wild horses. No, from this moment on, they were war horses. They stepped on the hard soil of the grassland and walked slowly but firmly to the north. They were the Tang army. The strongest cavalry in the world had always been invincible. The warhorses they led had been invincible in the swamp in the north of the West Wilderness for decades. The cavalrymen of the Golden Tribe Royal Court were strong, but they were nothing in front of them. Dust covered the sky above the grassland. Finally, it was time to get on the horses. Situilan rode on the brown wild horse and slowly drew out her cold saber from the sheath. She raised the blade and pointed at the grassland cavalrymen. She was expressionless and did not speak. The bodyguard beside her suddenly roared angrily. All the Tang soldiers roared at the same time. Several years of depression, accompanied by this angry roar, turned into battle intent. Then it was a silent charge. It was suffocating and silent charge. Many cavalrymen of the Northern Battlefront Army were not familiar with charging. However, when they raised their sabers and urged their horses to charge forward, the familiar feeling came back to them. It was a feeling of invincibility. Countless clouds of dust cut the grassland. Countless iron streams rushed toward the Golden Tribe. In a moment, the sound of killing shook the sky. In the direction of Chilian City. On the side of Guha. All the cavalrymen of the Northern Battlefront Army rushed out of there. The black iron streams converged toward the Golden Tribe from 3 directions. If someone could see the grassland from the sky, he would be shocked speechless by this magnificent scene. The cold wind blew Situilan's hair on her cheeks. She thought, for victory. Wang Wu bit his lips, and his eyes were filled with determination. He thought, for the city of Wei. Under the flag of the Golden Tribe. Chanyu looked very pale. Lebu anxiously urged him to retreat and join the national master at the rear. Chanyu did not speak. No one knew what he was thinking. Until now, he finally understood why the national master did not agree with his decision to take the risk. The academy. Ning Ke was so cruel. The Golden Tribe lost. He knew it clearly. With a pft, he spat out a mouthful of blood, swayed, and fell off the horse. On the meadow of Guha. Ning Ke put down the binoculars and thought of what he had seen. He was silent. He handed the binoculars to General Su Chi. Su Chi looked at him and asked, "You have endured for so many years just for today. Don't you think it's risky?" Ning Ke thought for a while and said, "This is the only way." Su Chi said, "If you had given the horses to me earlier, we could still win. But we can't kill them all." After saying this, he walked down the meadow. Situilan wanted to win. Wang Wu wanted to win. So he wanted to kill them all. Therefore, from the very beginning, he wanted to kill them all. Please cast your monthly votes. Chapter 1087. What Ning Ke wanted to do had been decided a long time ago. It was just that he needed to think about how to do it thoroughly. So, this is my solution. I have worked hard to think and write about this plot seriously. I hope everyone will be satisfied. From the beginning, he only had one thing in mind, to kill them all. From the beginning, I only had one thing in mind, to serve all of you. Well, this is not pretentious, nor is it mushy, because I am also one of you. I will choose the solution and plot that I am more willing to see. Compared to the words, willing to see, other things will be relatively later, such as things like military ability. Well, I have never thought about it from the beginning. I am originally a military idiot, but it does not affect the things I write. I am very happy. I like this plot, and Ning Ke who is not liked by others. If you have the same opinion as me, please encourage and support me. Or, from the beginning, what I wanted to do was to solicit monthly votes. Thank you, everyone. See you tomorrow. Chapter 1088. The setting sun was as red as blood. Hua Ying, the vanguard general of the northern battlefront army of Tang, stood in the howling wind and looked at the fading dust. He finally relaxed and was supported by Situelan. Blood and corpses were everywhere in the field hundreds of miles away from Guha. The strong wind from the north had been blowing for a whole day, so the smell of blood was not so strong. But the world was still red. The preparation for the war started in the early morning and the cavalry started to fight before noon. They fought until dusk. Of course, the Tang army was the final winner. The cavalry of the Golden Tribe Royal Court suffered heavy casualties. Chanyu was in a coma. Several high priests sent to the front line died in the melee. At the last moment, the young slave, Ada, was summoned back by the nation master. He escorted the badly wounded Lebu and retreated with the remaining soldiers. That was how he escaped the fate of being crushed by the cavalry. General Su Chi had prepared 700 black armored cavalrymen for this young slave. They had been waiting at the edge of the battlefield for this young slave to kill him when he brought up the rear. The Golden Tribe Royal Court retreated to the north. The Tang army started to chase after them and the Tang army started to clean up the battlefield. This was the fiercest battle in 1,000 years, so it naturally created the most tragic battlefield. Arms were cut off by padeos, bodies were disemboweled, pools of black blood were everywhere, annoying mosquitoes and flies were everywhere, and painful moans were everywhere. The medical team of the Tang army kept moving in the field. The cavalrymen carried stretchers with excellent horsemanship and sent the injured comrades to the barracks. The most seriously injured soldiers would be dragged back to the Guha military village by carts for further treatment. They were fighting against time to save as many people as possible. Apart from treating their comrades and collecting weapons and armors, there was another important task, which was to accept the surrender, collect the captives and the wounded soldiers who could no longer fight. Hundreds of Tang soldiers walked in the field with their horses, but strangely, they did not see any captives. A grassland barbarian was lying in the wild grass, staring at the gray sky with despair in his eyes. His slightly rising and falling chest showed that he was not dead yet. His pale face was covered with blood. A shadow fell on his face, followed by the blade of the knife. A cavalryman of the Golden Tribe was pinned down by the corpse of his mount. His lungs were pierced by his broken ribs. Blood kept spurting out from his lips. He could not die immediately and kept howling in pain. When he saw the Tang soldiers walking over with blood-stained padeos in their hands, he showed no fear or despair. Instead, he showed a joyful expression and shouted something in the language of the prairie, full of begging. The common soldiers of the northern battlefront army could understand the barbarian language, so the Tang soldiers understood it. They looked at each other and hesitated. At this moment, Wang Wui limped over. He raised his saber and killed the dying cavalryman of the Golden Tribe. He also cut off his head. A Tang soldier said, "We just don't want to give him a quick death. Whether he's in pain or not has nothing to do with us. I didn't chop off his head to show my benevolence. It's just that, there are still so many heads to chop off. I don't have time to wait for you." After saying that, Wang Wu led his warhorse and walked towards the meadow where there were even more corpses. Behind him, there was a cart full of grassland barbarians' heads. Wang Wu and his comrades did not want to give those wounded grassland barbarians a quick death. They did it not because of humanity, but because they needed those heads. They wanted the heads of the grassland barbarians, not because of the merit. It was purely because the general's mansion had issued an order that all the heads of the grassland barbarians must be chopped off and collected. As for taking captives, there were no captives on the battlefield today. Hua Ying's pale face showed a satisfied smile as he looked around the wilderness, the setting sun and the blood-red world. Then he coughed and his beard was splashed with blood. As the vanguard general, he had made the most contribution today. But he really did not care about it. And he knew that he did not need to care about it anymore. You should know why I've been suffering in the frontier all these years. Hua Ying's voice was a little intermittent. He seemed very tired, but his voice was clear and energetic. Situilan did not say anything. She helped him sit on the meadow. The Hua family was loyal to Liu. They had played a dishonorable role in the battle for the throne a few years ago. But they were suppressed by Ning Ke and the late empress. Hua Shangyue died and the Hua family quickly declined. They believed that after this battle, they would forget about the past. But it was hard for Hua Ying to forget about the past. The Academy, or Mr. 13, is really a cold-hearted man. Looking at the tragic scene around him, he thought of the Hua family's miserable experience and the dozens of Gushan commandery soldiers who were sent to the front line to die. He shook his head. If he had let the northern battlefront army take those wild horses in advance, or even if he had just told the general or me, I don't think so many people would have died in the past 3 years. Situilan did not say anything. As a student of the academy, a former friend and a current follower of Ning Ke, she did not agree with Hua Ying. But she could not defend herself at this moment. Because the Tang army had paid too much for the lack of warhorses in the past 3 years. Too many people had died today. But I like it very much. Hua Ying suddenly laughed. Full of admiration and emotion, he continued, the Golden Tribe is really powerful. His method should have the least casualties. But in the process, he had to be ruthless to the end. Only by doing so could he win the war with the least cost. I admire him and sympathize with him. It was complicated and even illogical, but Situilan understood it. Hua Ying looked at the grassland in the distance under the twilight. He looked at the dust, the enemies who were running in panic, and the soldiers of the northern military camp who were not far behind. He finally closed his eyes. He still had a smile on his face, a satisfied smile. Defeating the cavalry of the Golden Tribe royal court and watching the talented and bold Chanyu and the unfathomable nation master run away like dogs was undoubtedly the best thing for a future Tang general. He could finally rest in peace after seeing this scene. Situilan put her hand in front of his nose and paused for a long time. Finally, she let go of his hand and put the body on the meadow. She signaled the military doctor who had been waiting for him to handle the body. She stood up, still in the wind. Part of the flag of the Tang Empire was burnt in the fierce battle. It was black and ugly, but the golden thread inside was still dazzling in the twilight, as if it would last forever. She looked around with the broken flag and then to the north. The remaining forces of the Golden Tribe Royal Court were running north at full speed. The northern battlefront army had defeated the main force of the Royal Court, but it did not mean that they were completely wiped out. Hua Ying did not remind her anything before he died. He did not tell her that she could not let Chanyu escape. He knew very well that the Golden Tribe Royal Court would not be able to survive this time. Because the grassland people had gone south to the Tainan. If the grassland people had stayed at the front line of the 7 stockade villages instead of attacking like wildfire, even if they were defeated, they would have a great chance to escape to the depths of the grassland, just like they had done hundreds of years ago. The grassland was so vast that it would be difficult to fight or find them in summer. By then, it would be difficult for the Tang army to wipe them out. But now the grassland people had gone too far south and even passed through the Xiangwan plain. How could they escape? Situilan did not think the grassland people could escape, and she would not allow them to do so. She looked at the messy dust in the north and said, "Take a rest and get ready to chase." It was noisy in the vanguard camp of the northern battlefront army. The smell of numbing powder was everywhere. In the iron furnace room on the east side, the sound of hitting weapons could be heard, but not many people were talking. After a whole day of bloody battle, the generals and soldiers were exhausted to the extreme. The Tang army also paid a terrible price. Even General Hua died of blood loss and exhaustion. The atmosphere in the barracks was good, but it was quiet because they had regained hope in a desperate situation and then defeated the strong enemy. The flattest meadow behind the vanguard camp had been isolated. It was even quieter than the camp. Even the sound of the black donkey chewing grapes could be heard clearly. Fourth brother walked to the shabby sedan and pointed at his younger brother and younger sister. He introduced them to the black donkey. "They are sixth brother and seventh sister. I entered the school earlier than them, so I am the fourth." The black donkey was still very reserved. He nodded and said nothing. But he was thinking that it was lucky that they were not third or third brother. Otherwise, he would have to greet them first if he entered the school earlier. The big black horse shook his head and ran over excitedly. He looked around but did not see the familiar figure. He suddenly lowered his head and looked a little disappointed. "I don't know where youngest brother is," fourth brother explained. "In fact, no one knows where he is since he left Chang'an." The mysterious national master did not participate in this bloody battle. He helped Chanyu from the beginning and led the most elite and loyal Duoer cavalry to retreat to the north quickly. Perhaps it was because of this that Ning Kai did not participate in the battle. He did not appear after the battle. No one knew where he went. Just like the past spring, he disappeared again. The big black horse was a little disappointed. He walked to the top of the meadow and looked at the sun that was gradually being swallowed by the ground. He was silent. He knew that the sun was actually swallowed by the Black Sea in the north. The sun that never sets on the grassland was the emperor of the desolate man empire. Then it was the great divine priest of light who founded the devil's doctrine. Then it was Chanyu of the golden tribe royal court. Chanyu had always thought that he was the sun. Even if he set, he would still rise again tomorrow. But today he felt that it would be difficult for him to rise again. The most loyal Duoer cavalry escorted him to the city of Wei. General Lebu's injuries were stabilized and he recovered quickly with the help of the high priest. When the young slave Ada stood silently in front of his bed, he still had enough power and enough powerhouses. He still had the national master. But he still felt that he was struggling at the bottom of the cold sea and would suffocate at any time. Because he was very afraid. This chapter has been edited. Chapter 1089. The main cavalry of the royal court was defeated. Many tribes no longer followed his footsteps and scattered on the grassland. They would become the captives of the Tang cavalry, or even be taken advantage of by the horse gang. This scared him. Just a moment ago, he was about to become the ruler of the entire world, and in the next moment, he was shot in the cheeks by a hidden arrow on his way to the throne. Blood flowed out, and the blood was very ugly. No matter who it was hard for anyone to accept this fact. His confidence and ambition were crushed to the point where they couldn't be any more shattered. This scared him. What scared him the most was that when he saw tens of thousands of wild horses coming in the morning glow and those miraculous things happening in front of him, he realized that all these years of high spirits and the great ambition of riding horses to the Central Plains were actually a scam. This was the Academy's plot, and that person's plot. A few years ago, the West Hill Divine Palace and the Tang Empire made peace, and the Golden Tribe Royal Court benefited the most from it. Whether it was the cession of the Xianwan Plain or the surrender of the warhorses, it was like putting a rope around the neck of the Tang Empire. Now it seemed that the Tang Empire was showing weakness, and tempted the royal court to take the risk of moving south. Ning Kai, He murmured this name many times, so many times that it went deep into his bones. He did not understand. This plot of the academy was actually very risky. If there was a slight problem, the grassland cavalry could easily sweep the central plains. Then why did the academy do this? What else was worth the risk of the Tang Empire other than the extinction of the Golden Tribe? When did the academy become so cold-blooded? What kind of hatred did Mr. 13 have with him? Chan Yu thought for a long time, and gradually calmed down. He was talented and bold. Even though he was defeated by the Tang outside Guha, and even saw the real picture of the abyss of destruction, he was still a big shot. How could he be reconciled? He calmed down again and decided to take a risk. Since the Tang Empire could set up a plot, endure for 3 years, and take the risk to achieve great achievements. Why couldn't he take the risk? Why couldn't he succeed? He believed that the Tungri heaven did not abandon him. Not long after, the respected elders of the tribe, General Buell, and the high priest who was the representative of the national master, all came to his room. They saw Chan Yu's back facing the sand table in silence. The Chan Yu pointed at an inconspicuous small city on the sand table and said calmly, "I know the Tang people and many people in the tribe think that the war is over and that the battle that day was the final battle, but I don't think so. This is the city of earth under our feet, and it is also the place I chose for the final battle." No one understood what he meant. The royal court was far from being a match for the Tang Empire. Even if they wanted to fight to the death, how could the other party give them the chance? In other words, what right did the royal court have? The Tang, or the Academy's goal is to destroy the tribe. They want to kill us all. Our goal now is to escape from the Tang's pursuit and return to our homeland. We don't have any provisions. There are some in the Chiching stockade. I've already sent Su Yong to get them. Those rations aren't enough to support us back. Hundreds of thousands of people are naturally not enough, but if only 30,000 people go, it's still enough. The Tang people will always be following us. So we need a victory, a decisive victory that will throw the Tang people into chaos. Only then can we keep the last flame of the tribe. The Chan Yu looked at the flat field on the sand table and the 7 cities above it. After a moment of silence, he said, "Su Chi wants to kill us all, so he can only gather his troops and push towards the north. The formation can't be too thick. If 10,000 Duoer cavalry break through the central line and attack the northern military camp, or even further south, do you think the Tang Empire will not be shaken? How will the academy react?" General Buell said, "The main force of the Tang army will arrive tomorrow morning. Su Chi will not make such a mistake. The world's best general in defense, of course, will not make such a mistake. But that was in the past, just like how I would not make the mistake of charging with all my troops." The Chan Yu shook his head and said, "I did not see through the academy's plan. Su Chi has to follow the academy's plan because the academy wants all of us to die. He can only do so." The room was silent. Everyone felt that something was wrong. Chan Yu's decision was not a risk, but a crazy gamble. No, it was not even a gamble. It was more like turning back and shouting helplessly before entering the abyss of despair. Even if Su Chi could really arrange the Tang army into the easiest line, even if the Duoer cavalry could really break through to the south, they could not change the whole situation. Ada's eyes lit up. He completely understood what Chan Yu meant. Chan Yu did not want to win at all. He only wanted to take 20,000 elite cavalries with him. Then he would lose the war and the Tang Empire would not get what they wanted. After they recuperated and Taoism stabilized the south, they might be able to win the whole world again. After a moment of silence, Buell said, "I'll go." No one argued with him. This was not about military exploits, nor was it about dying for the imperial court. It was a cold consideration of reality. Neither Ada nor the priests were able to command a large number of cavalries. The high priest said, "The nation master will accompany us to escort the Chanyu back." Ada did not say anything. He knew his role. When the Duoer cavalry broke through the defense line of the Tang army and entered the southern grassland or even the northern military camp to loot and kill, the Tang army would chase after the palace where Chanyu was at the fastest speed. The fastest speed required the shortest distance, and the shortest distance was a straight line. This seemed to be the theory from the academy. The palace would return from the city of Wei to the north, and the Tang would chase from there. What he had to do was to guard the only street in the city of Wei. Ada bowed to the Chanyu and turned to leave. He walked to the street, pushed open a dusty old shop and sat by the table. He did not leave again. The rest of the people left the room and started to prepare for the escape and the south. After the nation master knew the plan of the Chanyu, he naturally had to make corresponding arrangements. The house was empty. The Chanyu turned to the window and looked at the bright moon in the night sky. He seemed to have gained some kind of strength from the warm and loving light. After the city of Wei was slaughtered, most of the houses were uninhabitable. The grassland people were used to living in tents outside the city. The place he stayed in today was a relatively secluded courtyard. He did not know who this courtyard used to belong to. He did not know who used to belong to the city of Wei. So he did not know why that person wanted to kill him. If he knew that Tingri had lived here for many years, maybe he would think differently. The battle that took place on the grassland outside Guha was the most spectacular and tragic cavalry battle in 1,000 years since the Tang defeated the Desolate Man. The number of cavalrymen from the Golden Tribe Royal Court who participated in this battle was more than that of the Tang army. Besides, the Tang cavalry had hardly received any cavalry training over the years. Logically speaking, the royal court had the upper hand, but the Tang army won in the end. Especially before the northern battlefront army's ambush, the cavalry of the vanguard battalion managed to block the royal court's cavalrymen. That was because the Tang army had more strength than the royal court's cavalrymen. That was the spirit of valiance. The Tang army had this spirit, and so did the wild horses they rode. In the spring wind of the grassland, the Tang army waved their padeos and silently hacked their enemies to death one after another. Those wild horses trampled on the wildflowers and grass and galloped recklessly. They even imitated the Tang army and humiliated the grassland horses of the palace. The Battle of Guha was destined to be recorded in the magnificent picture of history. In hindsight, this cavalry battle might not be the decisive battle of the whole world, but it was definitely the most important one. After winning the war, even if the Golden Tribe Royal Court still had the power to fight, they would not be able to pose any threat to the foundation of the Tang Empire. To put it more directly, even if the Golden Tribe Royal Court exerted all their power after that day, they would not be able to destroy the Tang Empire. For the whole world, what was more important was that the Tang Empire had solved the big problem in the north for many years. Now the emperor and ministers in Chang'an could focus all their energy and resources on the south. If they could stabilize the situation before Taoism solved the internal dispute, Peach Mountain would face unimaginable pressure. A few days later, Situilan led the cavalry of the vanguard battalion to the front line of the 7 stockade villages. At this time, she and all the Tang army had already won, but they wanted a bigger victory. During this time, the bodyguards of the northern military camp and a unit of the Western Expedition Army that was quietly transferred here from the Pamir Mountains half a year ago had bitten the cavalry of the Golden Tribe Royal Court like wolves at the cost of heavy sacrifices. They would not let go even if they were bleeding all over. The cavalry of the Royal Court, who had always been known for their flexibility, was forced to slow down their retreat to the north. They had just entered the front line of the 7 stockade villages yesterday and were caught up by the main force of the Tang army. Under such circumstances, the grassland cavalry that had retreated to the 7 stockade villages did not dare to leave the villages and march to the grassland. It was tantamount to leaving their backs to the terrible Tang people. Even the Duoer cavalry that had set up camp in the city of Wei did not dare to do so. It would inevitably mean destruction. The remaining 100,000 or so grassland cavalry set up camp in the 7 stockade villages in an attempt to temporarily stabilize the situation. After a stalemate, they would find time to escape the pursuit of the Tang army and escape into the depths of the grassland. However, those tribes that were still hoping for a fluke did not know that Chanyu had made a cold-blooded and only correct decision. He would use these tribal cavalry to attract the main force of the Tang army and try to thin the formation of the Tang army. Then he would send 10,000 elite Duoer cavalry to the south unexpectedly. This arrangement would cost the lives of more than 100,000 grassland cavalry. If everything went well, it could be exchanged for 20,000 Duoer cavalry and bigwigs like Chanyu to escape into the depths of the grassland. This exchange was cruel and seemed to be a loss, but it had to be done. Now that the Tang army had warhorses, it would not be easy for the palace cavalry to retreat to the grassland. Especially now that the Tang army had obviously gone mad and were more terrifying than the grassland people, like a pack of wolves. If the Tang army focused on chasing them, the palace cavalry would not dare to turn back and intercept them. They would be completely annihilated in less than 300 miles. When Chanyu was making his final preparations, the Tang army surrounded the 7 stockade villages. It was not accurate to say that they were surrounded, because the grassland in the north seemed to be endless and they could enter at any time. That was the path of survival that the Tang army left for the palace cavalry, but also the path of death. The main force of the northern battlefront army and the tribe's cavalry in the 7 stockade villages formed a stalemate. But the stalemate did not last long. Without any warning, the battle between the two sides began fiercely again. It seemed to be endless killing, and the lives of the soldiers from both sides were being taken away. There was chaos everywhere. 3 days later, the royal flag fluttered in the wind and dust filled the sky. The Tang Central Military Tent had arrived at the south of the city of Wei. Su Qi, the Tang's Defender General of the state, had finally arrived at the front line. He was not late. As long as he could see the Golden Tribe being annihilated before the end of the war, he would not be considered late. Surprisingly, neither Su Qi nor Chanyu in the city of Wei gave any direct orders for the bloody battle on the hundreds of miles in the north of the continent. They just silently watched the cavalry charge and die, and then went to Kaiping and other stockade villages to replenish their forces. The war was a war between nations. It could not be finished in a day. Before the war was over, there was no time to rest. Only when one side died could they live. That was the truth. Therefore, Su Qi and Chanyu did not care. They just sent their men to the battlefield and let them kill or be killed by the enemy. For the Tang army, they had already won, so they wanted to kill as many of the enemy's forces as possible. Since they were going to annihilate the entire nation, that was the truth. A few simple sentences were far from enough to describe the bloody battle on the front line of the 7 stockade villages. It was not enough to describe the pressure faced by the remaining soldiers of the Golden Tribe royal court and the sacrifices made by the Tang army. People only needed to remember that in just a few days of siege, the number of people who died had almost exceeded the number in the Guha plain that day. Different from Kaiping, Chu City and other stockade villages, the city of Wei, which was supposed to be the main battlefield, was very quiet. There were no bloody scenes of cavalry charging and killing, not even the sound of hooves. The Golden Tribe royal court was here, and so was the central military tent of the Tang army. But the battle seemed far away. Su Qi looked at the dusty city through the binoculars. He frowned and remained silent. The only ones who can fight are the 30,000 Duoer cavalry. A staff officer said confusedly, according to calculations, there are at least 10,000 Duoer cavalry around the city of Wei. Is Chanyu really going to defend the city? The city of Wei was the smallest city among the 7 stockade villages. Not to mention that the grassland people were not good at defending cities, this small city could not accommodate 20,000 cavalrymen. Now the Duoer cavalry had set up camp in the grassland north of the city, but they did not retreat before the Tang army arrived. Were they going to fight to the death here? Su Qi looked at the city and suddenly said, "They are going south again." When the officers in the central tent heard this, they all raised their heads in shock. After such a painful defeat, would the grassland people still dare to go south? Even if the Duoer cavalry broke through the defense line and entered Xiangwan Plain, what could they do? Would they still dare to go to Chang'an? Suddenly, someone realized the problem. The defense of the central military tent is too weak. We should ask General Situ to help immediately. A staff officer said anxiously, otherwise, if the Duoer cavalry really broke through, the safety of the central military tent will be a big problem. Most importantly, once the situation becomes chaotic, Chanyu might really escape. There is no need to do those unnecessary things. Su Qi looked at the city and thought of the man's promise. He said, "Where do you think the Duoer cavalry will attack from? Going around the city will consume too much of the horses' energy, and they will be easily killed by our crossbows. If I were Chanyu, I would definitely choose to go through the city if I really wanted to go south to create chaos." Su Qi did not say anything more. He turned around and walked to the back of the tent, ready to take a nap. He had not slept for several days and nights, so he was really tired. As for Chanyu's foresight, decision and courage, since he had already seen through it, there was nothing to worry about. Because someone had promised that nothing would go wrong. Su Qi slept soundly that night. When he woke up, the sky was still dark. It was the darkest time before dawn. He washed up and drank a bowl of mare's milk. Then he put on his armor and led his horse to the higher meadow beside the camp. He took off the telescope from the saddle and looked at the city again. At dawn, the world was quiet. The gates of the city were closed, and there was no light inside. It was like a ghost town. But Su Qi knew that Chanyu's strongest cavalry would soon rush out from that gate. He appeared calm in front of his soldiers, but he was actually a little worried. Otherwise, he would not have come early in the morning to observe the enemy and confirm the time of the enemy's attack. The main force of the northern battlefront army had been transferred to Kaiping, Chu City and other battlefields. The central military tent was facing the main tent of the Golden Tribe royal court. When the 10,000 Duoer cavalry rushed through the city, how could they resist? Su Qi had always thought that he could trust that person completely. But looking at the silent city before dawn, he still felt a little uneasy. The city was not high. The watchtower on the gate was only 3 feet away from the ground. When dawn came, people with better eyesight could even see the stubborn weeds in the yellow soil. When Su Qi was looking at the city, someone was also looking at him from the city. The national master of the Golden Tribe looked at the tents of the Tang army on the meadow in the distance. He looked at the warhorses eating grass with their heads lowered. His old face still did not regain its calmness after seeing the military intelligence reported by the palace cavalry. The Tang central military tent was very quiet. Thinking of the tragic scenes in the other cities and the royal court cavalry's struggle, he knew that Su Qi had already guessed Chanyu's intention. But why was he so cooperative? The national master did not want to calculate the success rate of Chanyu's risky strategy. Since the royal court had been forced to the abyss by the Tangs, they had to put up a struggle. They could not fall so easily. The last choice was the best choice, wasn't it? Yes, he knew it was from the academy. Su Qi's confidence probably came from the academy. Since the beginning of the war, the academy had not really made a move. The real powerhouses had not made a move yet. In the quiet dawn, the national master looked at the sky, waiting for someone to come. You're tuning into the Han Li's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.